the webinar.
On behalf of the Wireless Broadband Alliance, we would like to say a warm hello to everyone and welcome to the Wireless Global Congress Summer Webinar Series. Your webinar is about to commence and all attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. After each presentation, there will be a question and answer session. So if you have any questions you would like to raise, please enter them into the questions pane. I would now like to hand over to your host for this webinar, Mr. Tiago Rodrigues, CEO at the Wireless Broadband Alliance.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. So my name is Tiago Rodrigues. I'm the CEO of the WBA, and I want to welcome all of you to the WBA Wireless Global Congress webinar series. Our initial plan, in fact, was to be in Chicago this week. We planned a co-location of the WBA and Wi-Fi Alliance event together, but unfortunately, due to COVID-19 pandemic, we need to change our plans. And we now, let's say, we live in a new reality, and we took the need to go virtual with our events. But we can rely on Wi-Fi to be connected and to communicate between all of us. Before I jump into my presentation, I want to give you a quick snapshot of the webinar series. So today is the first webinar of our event. It's what we call the Executive Plenary. We'll have tomorrow another webinar focusing on Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E. And on Friday, we'll do a deep dive on the WBA Open Roaming initiative. Then throughout July, we'll have one webinar every Wednesday. And if you have a chance, please consider to attend. The webinar is available to all the WBA members and the members of our industry partners, including Wi-Fi Alliance and other industry bodies, but as well to anyone from the public can attend as well our event. And I hope you feel it useful and interesting. Want to give a big thank you as well to our webinar sponsors. Without them, this type of events were not possible to be done. So Cisco, Intel, Boingo, our charter sponsors, and then Cognitive Systems, Global Reach, On Semiconductors, Huawei, YConnect, Massima Telecom, and Starlight, our diamond sponsors. So a big thank you for making these events possible. Today, I have the honor to have a fantastic agenda. You can see the speakers for today's webinar. That includes our special guest, FCC Chairman, Chairman Pai, and we'll cover a variety of topics, including Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, open roaming, PassPoint, the role of Wi-Fi on IoT, how Wi-Fi is driving automation, digitalization of industries, and we'll talk as well about the convergence, 5G and Wi-Fi. For me, as I said, it's a big pleasure to moderate such a panel of speakers. Apart from being great industry leaders, they are all, I can consider them all my friends. So I know them, all of them for quite some time. So it will be a pleasure to be moderating this webinar. Before I jump into my slides, just some housekeeping. So all these webinars will be recorded. So if you are registered for the webinar, you can then have access to the recording. And as my colleague shared, we'll have a Q&A session. So you will have the chance to put questions to any of the speakers, and I will make my best to reserve some time to go through your questions. If we don't have time to cover all the questions on the webinar, I will make sure that our speakers will get access to your questions, and we can answer as well to those offline. Okay, let me jump into my presentation, and I want to start to introduce you to WBI. So for those of you that are not so familiar with the Wireless Broadband Alliance, I would like to spend just a few minutes giving you a quick overview. I saw in the registration there is a quite number of non-members of the Alliance, so I believe this could be useful. So first of all, WBA is the typical non-profit trade association. We pursue this vision of developing seamless and interoperable services based on Wi-Fi and the convergence of the Wi-Fi within the rest of the wireless ecosystem. What we do in just a quick snapshot, we enable collaboration between our members, and this includes service provider, technology companies, other organizations, and anyone that we believe it's relevant to get involved on our programs. And of course, that collaboration is based on a series of programs and projects that we developed either to solve a business problem or to enable or accelerate a business opportunity. Good as well, to give you a snapshot of our priorities, we are in WBA very keen to accelerate one agenda of massification of automatic, secure, and interoperable Wi-Fi roaming. I will be talking about several programs that are enabling this vision. As our second priority, we really want to accelerate the adoption of next generation Wi-Fi networks and all the technologies, features, services that can make Wi-Fi a better technology. And this can include new standards like Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E, but as well services like open roaming or KPIs related with quality of service that can improve the Wi-Fi for everyone. And the third priority is all about our work on convergence and coexistence of Wi-Fi. So in WBA, we believe that technologies, they don't work in isolation. And in fact, majority of the time, all of us as consumers, we have more than one wireless technology available. And it's very important that Wi-Fi can take advantage of all the opportunities that coexistence and that convergence can bring. And I will cover that as well later on my presentation. Important to give to you that are not familiar with WBA to understand who is behind this organization. So this is a snapshot of our members. You can see that is a quite robust number of service providers, operators, but as well technology providers, all with the same goals in pursuing the vision of WBA. And you can see as well the board members of the organizations, and that somehow they drive the agenda of the Alliance. A final slide that I want to take this opportunity to give a big welcome to new members of the Alliance. So thank you for joining WBA in 2020. You are helping to make the Alliance stronger. I will leave you the message as your first Congress as member. I will leave the message. Please feel free to reach out to me or anyone from my team. Anything that you may need from us, feel free to reach out. And I'm looking forward to work with all of you to help you to accomplish your goals and to maximize the benefits of being part of this alliance. Let me move on, and I want to share some of my thoughts on how Wi-Fi has been super relevant in today's world with the COVID-19 pandemic. And to do this, I took this quote from the speech of Chairman Pai, our special guest for today. And really, I believe this represents the role that Wi-Fi has been having lately. So Wi-Fi has helped keep us connected to our families and friends, and as well to the outside world. It enables children to take part in distant learning while their parents participate in video conferences for work. So Wi-Fi during these challenging times has been the glue to try to make our lives continue to be some kind of normal, and we can communicate with all of us. And this will be reflected in several of the content that will be shared today, not only by me, but as well by the other speakers. And to reinforce this statement, let me share some examples, and I took the freedom just to select examples from US and specifically from service providers from the US. And I want to reinforce the important role of Wi-Fi during the pandemic. So you can see, for example, the CEO or the former CEO of AT&T talking about volumes on Wi-Fi calling going up by 100%. We have CTO from Charter Spectrum talking about increases of 1/3 of increases on traffic. The same from Comcast, increases over mobile data, but as well on upstream and downstream traffic. Google providing free access in California to more than 100,000 Wi-Fi access hotspots. And then from our friends from Sprint and T-Mobile US, the traffic going up on educational apps, collaboration tools, and you can understand how important has been Wi-Fi to all of us. And I think all these conclusions or data points from all these service providers, they reinforce the important decision that FCC took earlier in April of releasing additional spectrum for unlicensed use. And I think that will help Wi-Fi to be a better technology, and all of us provide a more robust and more advanced services to everyone. At the same time, here at the WBA, we have not been somehow, we didn't stop during this pandemic period, and in fact we had a very active period, and I want to thank you all the members for all the time, dedication and efforts to the Alliance. And I want to highlight some of the achievements that we had during these months. So we managed to launch our 2020 program. We have over 17 technical projects in progress. We have a very comprehensive program of field trials on Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, over 20 trials all around the globe, including countries like US, UK, Spain, Korea, Germany, Australia, India, and many others. We launched recently the Open Roaming Federation to provide auto-secure public guest Wi-Fi services. We had over 30 members supporting this launch, and we got more than 1 million views by the media, what is quite an accomplishment for WBA. We launched as well one of our most relevant standards, that is the RICS. So for those of you that are not so familiar with the work of the Alliance, is our Wi-Fi roaming standard, and is on it. This standard is on the base of the creation of the Alliance, so it's quite relevant to us. And this update represents 18 months of intensive work of our members, over 50 companies involved. So it's with great pleasure that those standards were updated and now available to everyone. During this period, we reinforced it as well, our collaboration with regulators all across the world. We responded to public consultations, but as well, we got in touch with the European Commission, with the German regulator, UK regulator, Mexican regulator, regulators from Asia like Singapore, India, and China. So we have been quite active in creating those bridges between WBA and the work that all the members are doing, and these policymakers and regulators. And a kind of an internal message to my team, and I think Edgar Figueroa from Wi-Fi Alliance may agree as well. So I'm very proud of my team that managed to transform our event. So as I said, we were planning to be in Chicago this week, but thank you to WBA team, Wi-Fi Alliance team, we managed to transform our event from a physical event, and we are now all connected and sharing our thoughts on a virtual event. Let me now just share just a few highlights on my program, on the program of WBA. So open roaming, definitely a key element of our initiatives. So open roaming is a global cloud federation for Wi-Fi services. It has the goal and the ambition to change the way that we connect to Wi-Fi when we are outside our houses and outside our offices. And I like to do the comparison of open roaming with Visa. So we have the ambition to transform open roaming on the Visa of Wi-Fi. So any of us can go anywhere in the world and we can pay with our cards, or we can connect with our open roaming credentials. If you are interested in open roaming, please don't miss our webinar on Friday. We'll be doing a deep dive on open roaming. The next highlight that I want to bring is about our Wi-Fi 6 trials. So as I said, quite comprehensive program. I recommend that this initiative is quite relevant for us because not only it's a way and a vehicle to test the technology, but as well to educate our potential customers and partners, but at the same time promote adoption and open up business opportunities. So if you are interested on this topic of Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, once more, don't miss the webinar tomorrow. We'll be doing a deep dive in some of these field trials, but as well as sharing more information on the benefits of Wi-Fi 6. The last topic that I want to highlight is related with the Run Convergent. So this is a quite relevant program for WBA. For those of you that are more involved in the Alliance, you know that we have been spending a lot of efforts on these type of initiatives. We have identified multiple integration scenarios to integrate Wi-Fi and the cellular network, special on the 5G. You can see on this draw that we have been working on some architectures, and the members are now working very hard to kick off some field trials of 5G and Wi-Fi 6 integration by the end of the year. And I think this can enable quite a lot of interesting opportunities for all and reinforce the benefits of both technologies, the 5G and Wi-Fi 6 working together. Once more, if this topic is of your interest, please don't miss the webinar on Friday. We'll talk about open roaming, but as well run convergence and coexistence. And to finish my presentation, I just want to leave a message of celebration. And I want to invite all of you to be part of the World Wi-Fi Day on the 20th of June, so next Saturday. So I leave this message. So let's join forces. Let's share our appreciation for Wi-Fi. So I will invite you to share any type of statements, pictures, or retweet the messages from WBA on social media or any other platform that you consider relevant. I will pause for now. I hope that these initial slides that I share open up your appetite for the rest of the webinar. A big thank you to all of you and for your attention. So I propose that we move on to the next speaker on the agenda. The next speaker is Edgar Figueroa, the CEO of Wi-Fi Alliance. I think all of us on the Wi-Fi industry know Edgar. We can even say that we can call Edgar the Mr. Wi-Fi. So Edgar is a close friend. I believe he has been responsible for many of the successes of Wi-Fi in the last decades. For the WBA members, Edgar is a familiar face, so Edgar always make an effort to attend at least 1 or 2 events of WBA every year. So Edgar, I already consider you part of the family, so welcome to WBA Congress.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Thiago, and thanks JR and Thiago for the invitation to present to you all today. Just checking if you can see my full screen slide. I was having an issue.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. Let me start by expressing my best wishes to everyone, hoping that you and yours are safe and staying positive in what has been a year nobody could have imagined. 2020 is going to be the year that we remember, not only because of the pandemic, but also for our industry. Thiago already alluded, in retrospect, I think will be remembered as a seminal year for Wi-Fi because we're bringing in the new era of Wi-Fi connectivity with the 60 gigahertz band. Obviously, it'll also be an important year for WBA as it'll be the first full year under new CEO Thiago Rodriguez. I'll share my same sentiments that Thiago is not only someone I've had the pleasure of working well with for many years, but also someone I could consider a dear friend. And I want to wish you, Thiago, publicly much success in spearheading WBA into its next phase. At Wi-Fi Alliance, we consider WBA a sister organization with whom we collaborate closely because we share this mutual interest of driving Wi-Fi adoption. And during this period, I think it's very clear we can all recognize how important it is that Wi-Fi has been up to the task and that the work that our two organizations, Wi-Fi Alliance and WBA, are doing provides a great service to the world. And if you're involved in one of our two organizations or both, you definitely have a lot to be proud of because of the difference that we're making. So just by way of introduction, Wi-Fi Alliance is the worldwide network of companies that brings you Wi-Fi. We spend our time and efforts defining what goes into Wi-Fi and developing programs to make sure that Wi-Fi delivers as expected. We do that with collaboration that happens among about 900 companies worldwide that participate, and largely, I think we're able to do that because we're very effective at collaborating. You can appreciate in many cases it's competitors that are joining at the table and deliberating where Wi-Fi should go next. But the good thing is that results in great innovation that then yields prosperity and growth for all of us, and more than that, better Wi-Fi for the consumer. So I think the world now recognizes how essential Wi-Fi is. It has taken center stage over the last 6 months as the workhorse that allows us to take our lives online. This pandemic has tested Wi-Fi application and robustness and reliability in what I think is an experiment that could only have happened in the current circumstances with a worldwide pandemic that's forcing people to stay at home. And to our delight, and as we always knew, Wi-Fi has delivered. A clear picture is emerging that Wi-Fi is up to the task, that it can be relied on to do much more than people associated with it just a few months ago, including in critical areas where Wi-Fi is solving new problems and providing unexpected, new and critical services. So the current period may evolve the way people think about Wi-Fi in a very positive way and in a long-lasting way. I'll share just a few examples of what I'm talking about here. These are just representations, right? But the examples abound. We have an example, for example, of some of the biggest hospitals in Beijing who have moved a lot of the operations over telemedicine, providing remote consultation and services over Wi-Fi. Something that would have been hard to imagine folks in a hospital willingly doing that, but it has happened because of the pandemic. I mentioned earlier to some of us as we were preparing for this call that in Austin, before all is done with this, Austin, the city where I live, is going to go through a period of at least 6 months of stay-at-home orders. So students, obviously their learning has been affected by this with school closures, and yet many of them are able to keep up with their academics through online learning afforded by Wi-Fi connectivity, of course. And then just one last example, there's been, of course, reported a tsunami of network traffic over mobile networks to the extent that in Europe, the European Commission has recommended that consumers connect their devices first to Wi-Fi to relieve the mobile network stress. So that's yet another testament to the critical role that Wi-Fi is playing, the reliability that it's offering, and just depict how essential Wi-Fi has become. These examples, I think, show that a constant, essential, prominent role for Wi-Fi is going to be the new normal that's recognized because of how it's helping us navigate this period. Now, our industry is also providing a great example of community and coming to aid and help the world endure this period, not just through Wi-Fi connectivity, but a lot of other altruistic activities that they're involved in during the pandemic. So Wi-Fi Alliance and WBA member companies are doing the right thing by stepping up and helping us deal with this a little bit better. So examples of this include eliminating data caps and increasing speeds for consumers, offering free access to a whole web of Wi-Fi hotspots for many of the service providers, helping provide Wi-Fi to underserved communities or economically disadvantaged communities, waiving late fees and not disconnecting folks for non-payment, donating time, equipment, and money to first responders and healthcare providers, and providing just a whole other range of services. I've heard just tremendous examples of, for example, Wi-Fi being the last way that people connect with their family when they're in the ICU. It's very, heartwarming, but it also helps us recognize that all this technology that we deal with, it's just really bringing a little bit more comfort to the way that we're surviving through this period. So since some of our members are seeing a surge in demand through this period, is something that is somewhat counter to what some of you might think. But the reality is that many enterprises are realizing right now that good infrastructure, good security, good Wi-Fi are critical. And these are just reasonable basic expectations for folks these days. There's a report here from ABI stating not only the surging Wi-Fi traffic, but also how many of the features and capabilities that we're working on now should have immediate pent-up demand. I'm speaking about, for example, the capabilities that Wi-Fi 6E will bring. It's important to recognize all this because some of you may be worried about the recession that is just emerging or the long-lasting effects of the economic slowdown resulting from the pandemic. And obviously, as a part of the world's economy, Wi-Fi is going to ride a wave of the broader economic seas out there. But even though the long-term economic outlook and recovery are yet unclear, what is clear is that Wi-Fi is an undeniable utility and valuable service that's going to transcend this period. Obviously, it's critical right now. But I think that that memory of how Wi-Fi stepped up to help people stay connected to their family, how we help them continue their education or continue working, that's going to remain. And if you're going to go through a period of uncertainty like we are now, you want to be in an industry that is sure to ride this out, one that matters, one that is going to come out of this stronger than before. And absolutely, the Wi-Fi industry is such an industry. So let's recognize our good fortune. I just thought I'd mention here that obviously in the short term, as I mentioned before, Wi-Fi is being recognized as indispensable and a sound investment right now. And we're seeing that in folks sort of upgrading their networks to deliver the demand that exists right now. But in the long term, there's also an opportunity, as in the previous slide with that report from ABI, that if we just keep working on the priorities we set for ourselves in 2020, we'll come out of this in a strong position. So in Wi-Fi Alliance, our innovation will continue. We're accepting the challenge, and we've been extremely focused on our planned work so that we emerge from all of this even better with a stronger Wi-Fi offering. You may be surprised to hear that we have seen no slowdown in our development work. Our members have increased their workload and their commitments, allowing us to do much more remotely. And we haven't changed any of our plans or schedules for what we were intending to deliver in 2020. And obviously, if you've been tracking our work, you know that we've been very focused on the user experience, on security, and on spectrum. And that commitment is a good thing because we want to respond to FCC's historic move to open the 6 GHz band by populating that band with secure, interoperable Wi-Fi as soon as possible. And by next year, we expect to have more than 300 million new Wi-Fi devices using that 6 GHz spectrum. And as you can see here, our economic contribution is expected to exceed $150 billion, resulting just from that new spectrum by 2025. And that's just in the US, by the way. So if you hadn't followed what's going on with the 6 GHz band, you may not know that 6 GHz devices are known as Wi-Fi 6E devices because they use Wi-Fi 6 technology in a way that's being extended into the new spectrum. But Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, and mobile are all going to continue to have a very complementary role in providing connectivity. I believe together, these two technologies are going to address most of the scenarios out there, certainly those that deal with enterprises, industrial applications, IoT, et cetera. And you see out there, you see down here at the bottom of the slide that there's a number of target areas that we have in particular for the new 6E technology. So just a few words about that. Obviously, we continue to play a role in Wi-Fi Alliance in advocating for global harmonization, just as Tiago mentioned that WBA is involved in ensuring that that spectrum is used as quickly as possible. We believe just as important as anything is to ensure proper stewardship of that spectrum so that folks have a good experience, there's good interoperability, and good etiquette associated with Wi-Fi operating in that spectrum. We expect that by next year, there will be over 300 million devices already operating there. So it's important that we not only offer all of the performance benefits that people are starting to see with Wi-Fi 6 extended into the new spectrum, but also all of the assurances that devices are going to work together well, including with the latest security protections. And WPA3 is one of those requirements for Wi-Fi 6E, if you were not familiar with that. So we can't control what COVID-19 or the broader economy does, but we can control how we are positioned to continue growing our industry, what we're offering, and how we advance while Wi-Fi is evolving. And I can tell you that at least for the operator community, we know that Wi-Fi is only getting better and better in terms of addressing indoor environments, in terms of addressing the offload that's so important for operators, and in terms of addressing access to many of the environments where, because the demands are so great, Wi-Fi will continue to play a very strong role for operators. 2020 is still a year of much opportunity for us, even in the current conditions, as we continue to work to harmonize 6 GHz access and deliver some of these new capabilities with the new spectrum. So just in case your audience is not familiar with this, there's much work still remaining on 6 GHz in the US. Perhaps Chairman Pai is going to talk about the very low power and increased power for low power indoor devices, which is the next phase of this proceeding. In Brazil, there's already been announcements that they intend to open the 6 GHz band. We just had a call with the regulator on that last week. In Europe, obviously, there's an expectation that the lower half of the band may yet become available very soon. In Asia, there is some positive movement there with Korea considering 6 GHz band for licensed operation, particularly targeting Wi-Fi. But also there's interest in Australia, Japan, and various other regions. Just a quick snapshot of some of the things that I've alluded to that Wi-Fi Alliance is working on. Obviously, WPA3 is one of our living programs. We have an update coming in July that will bring more robust secret password protections and protections for mitigating new attacks. Wi-Fi Easy Connect will bring even easier onboarding and configuration, reducing the initial setup, particularly for operator environments. The Easy Mesh program will be an enhanced diagnostics and support for Wi-Fi 6. Optimized connectivity is focusing on QoS, optimizing roaming and network selections, which is very important to WBA, I'm sure, and roaming across mobile network environments. Then Wi-Fi 6 not only has the support for 6E devices, but also in addition, there's a Wi-Fi 6 Release 2 program that you can expect to see in the near future that will add uplink multi-user MIMO, improvements to performance, bandwidth, and throughput capabilities. We're still working on our Wi-Fi Halo program that operates in the sub-gigahertz band. So just in conclusion here, there's a lot going on in the Wi-Fi industry. We're not slowing down at all in 2020, with the focus really for everybody right now being on achieving global harmonization for 6 gigahertz. It was great leadership that was shown by FCC and Chairman Pai, and we're very hopeful that others will follow that great example. And on Wi-Fi 6, if you have been looking into this technology, we encourage you to support it, adopt it, roll it out. It'll be available in mass starting next year. Our certification program, if I failed to mention, is going to be available early Q1 next year. So you can plan for the interoperability for devices and those assurances at the beginning of 2021. So with that, I think I used up my time, Tiago, but thank you again, Tiago and JR, for the invitation. And it's been a great event so far. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Edgar. So as I shared on the beginning of the webinar, so we have some time for Q&A. So I can see at least one question. Well, let me start, Edgar, let me start with one personal question. Let's put it this way. So yeah, I would like to ask you what it means for you and for Wi-Fi Alliance being involved and watching this decision from FCC opening additional spectrum for unlicensed use. So I believe you were already involved when it was opened up for the 5 gigahertz, but now what it means for you in terms of the 6 gigahertz. So quite a major step, but would like to ask you if you could share your personal views and as well what you believe it means for the entire industry.
I'm having some camera problems. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. At least you can hear me. So I mentioned before that I feel very strongly that FCC secured the future of connectivity, no less, with this additional spectrum. The reality is, we've been making the case for many years that there was a looming day for Wi-Fi just ahead, where we would fall victims to our own success. And the reality is that all the elements that comprise the Wi-Fi recipe make it unique, right? Not the least of which is that it's very affordable. And so we implored FCC and other regulators to consider making an allocation for Wi-Fi so that those benefits would be prolonged. And the allocation that FCC stepped up with really does no less than secure the future of connectivity. Not just for Wi-Fi, but because it relieves the congestion across the board for other technologies by association as well. And in addition, of course, governments and our member companies are going to care about the economic contributions that also offers, right? I spoke about 150 billion just in a couple of years here into the U.S. economy. So those are very important. The last bit that I'll mention is that there's unimagined innovation that will happen, right? 20 years ago when Wi-Fi was first emerging, we could not imagine that we could have a web conference like we're having right now. Most of us are connected over Wi-Fi, and we're delivering this session to the world simultaneously, right? This would have really been something hard to imagine back then. this spectrum exceeds anything we ever had. So I'm confident that our engineers, our entrepreneurs are going to wow us with how they use it in the next decades.
Yeah, thank you, Edgar. Couple more questions, and I think at least one of them you already answered. So when certification for Wi-Fi 6E will start? And another one related with when Wi-Fi 6 equipment will be available both at the infrastructure level and end user equipment.
Right, so I can address all this. So I'll repeat, early 2021 is when we expect certification to happen. And as we know, usually that, unleashes breaks the dam, so to speak, right, for the industry. So we can have interoperability early 2021. As far as the first devices, we expect the first devices to emerge this year, and those will likely be access points. So you can expect the infrastructure devices to lead. That'll happen this year. There will be multiple such devices that'll come out. And then next year, we'll see endpoint devices being commercialized. We have been, our expectations have been exceeded in terms of the vendors that have stepped up to define the interoperability testbed that we're putting together. So we have all indications that there's going to be, a strong pivot toward supporting Wi-Fi 6E devices starting in 2021.
Okay, fantastic. Looking forward to have the Wi-Fi 6E equipment available and start to playing around. Thank you so much, Edgar, for your presentation. So, yeah, thank you. So I propose we move on the agenda. The next speaker is our special guest, FCC Chairman Pai. So personally, for me, it's a great honor to host Chairman Pai in WBI. I want to share with everyone that I was very well received by Chairman Pai and his team when I visited him in DC a few months back. So I was planning to give some of those warm hospitality back, but unfortunately, COVID-19 made us to live in this new reality. But nevertheless, Chairman Pai, it's a great honor and pleasure to have you in a WBA event. I want to take this opportunity to thank you personally for your leadership throughout this process of the 6 gigahertz and the release of additional spectrum in US for unlicensed use. I think that's a very brave decision and will set a direction for all other countries in other regions of the world to pursue. At the same time, a word to your to the other commissioners, so Commissioner Raleigh, Ross and Warsaw, Starks, and Commissioner Carr, that all supported this decision. I will take the freedom just to share and share a small confidence with all the audience that for me is a win-win situation having you here in today's webinar, because Chairman Pai, he likes and he loves my hometown, Lisbon, here in Portugal. So it for me was a great surprise, and Chairman Pai, a big welcome to WBI.
Well, thank you so much, Tiago. I hope you were going to extend an invitation to come to Lisbon to try those pastéis de nata once more. I still have fond memories, as does my stomach, of collectibles in Lisbon. But I do want to say thank you so much for taking the time. And even in the midst of a pandemic, I think Wi-Fi has helped you overcome the challenges and extend the hospitality back to me. So I really appreciate you and everybody participating in this Wireless Broadband Alliance event for giving me a chance to speak. And it's great to be with you today. And I should say, in the case of Edgar, it's great to be with you again. A few weeks ago, I had a chance to share with him some of the wireless, specifically the Wi-Fi initiatives that we've conducted, and he has been a tremendous advocate, as you've just heard over the last 15 minutes. I can't put it any better than him, that Wi-Fi has undeniable utility and value, and that's proven itself out during the pandemic. Now, I'm guessing there's some overlap in these audiences. In fact, this is the 4th webinar I've done on the 6 gigahertz band, among others. So I apologize in advance if these remarks might seem somewhat repetitive, but here's what I'm thinking as I approach this challenge. No matter how many times you see U2 live, you always want to hear, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And so in this case, I'm going to focus my remarks on the 6 gigahertz band, especially since we actually found it here. So I'm very excited about that. But I also want to throw in some of the FCC's greatest hits, so to speak, from our catalog over the last several months and project a little bit about where we might be going into the future. Now, if you're on this video conference, if you listen to Edgar's very poignant remarks just now, you know that on April 23rd, the FCC unanimously voted to make the entire 6 gigahertz band from 5925 to 7125 megahertz available for unlicensed use. And by doing this, we are making available a massive swath of 1200 megahertz for a test bed, essentially, for innovators and for innovation. And this is a big deal, I think, from our perspective and hopefully from yours as well. We are effectively increasing the amount of mid-band spectrum available for Wi-Fi by almost a factor of 5, a huge increase in supply, unlike any we've ever seen, arguably since the earliest days of Wi-Fi. All 1200 megahertz of this spectrum will be available for low power, indoor only low power use without the added complexity of database coordination. We're also making the 2 largest subbands, totaling 850 megahertz, available for use indoors and outdoors at standard power. Outdoors, of course, we'll use an automated frequency coordination mechanism to prevent interference with incumbent services. Now, going big has significant benefits. It means that we're allowing an unprecedented 160 and even 320 megahertz wide series of channels for Wi-Fi. This will dramatically ease spectrum capacity as a constraint on innovation. And I think, as Tiago hinted as well, it's going to open the door to new high bandwidth applications. And I want to stress again that we're doing all of this while protecting incumbents from harmful interference. These incumbents span the range from electric utilities to public safety entities, from broadcasters to wireless backhaul operators. And our AFC system in particular will only allow new standard power operations in areas that don't cause harmful interference to incumbents. And I think that's an important way of gaining public support and political support for our initiatives. Now, of course, why does all of this matter? The incredible experts that you've got lined up can answer this better than I can, but from my own humble abode, I would say that it's partly because Wi-Fi has come to resemble, in a good way, the Matrix, as it was described in that iconic first movie. If you remember Morpheus, when he's, as he might put it now, Wi-Fi is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now in this very room, you see it when you look outside your window or when you turn on your television. And the same is true now with Wi-Fi in the real world. Today, Wi-Fi carries more than half of the internet's overall traffic, which is a stunning number when you think about how quickly that's happened. And offloading mobile data traffic to Wi-Fi is vital to keeping our cellular networks from being overwhelmed. And this is kind of the symbiosis that Tiago and I had a chance to talk about when we met several months ago in my office, that that juxtaposition with cellular, with licensed, and Wi-Fi unlicensed does not need to be a dichotomy. I think there's a symbiosis there that can be maximized for the benefit of consumers. In fact, Cisco projects that 59% of mobile data traffic will be offloaded to Wi-Fi by 2022, which is not that far away. And moreover, as Tiago very ably said, the coronavirus pandemic, I think, has only amplified the needs of connectivity, and in particular has illustrated how indispensable Wi-Fi is in our daily lives. As he said, this entire event would not be possible without Wi-Fi. Students doing remote learning wouldn't be possible without Wi-Fi. Some of the innovative telehealth solutions we have seen over the last couple of months blossom would not be possible without Wi-Fi. And of course, all of the teleworking and other applications that we use over the wireless airwaves wouldn't be possible. And so, to me at least, making this 1200 megahertz band available for unlicensed operation is really a once-in-a-generation step to meet the growing demand for Wi-Fi capacity and meet it in a way that meets the moment. It's not just an incremental step, it's a transformative step, I think. And a big subject of this webinar, of course, is how Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E has already started rolling out. This next generation of Wi-Fi will be over 2.5 times faster than the current standard, and it'll offer better performance for connected devices. And I expect entrepreneurs, many of the folks on the call, to push the boundaries of what consumers think is possible in terms of applications and services. And now, speaking of consumers, I think another reason to celebrate is that they'll actually see the benefits in the not too distant future. This is not a case where the FCC made a decision and then years later, we hope, fingers crossed, that innovators do something with it. The consumer-facing pop, so to speak, for Wi-Fi 6, I think is going to be relatively short-term, possibly even in time for the upcoming holiday season. And you've heard the certification program that Edgar and his team will be doing will be available in the first quarter of next year. So by taking the extra time to work with all stakeholders, we can say to everybody involved that this is a true win-win. As much as I loathe that phrase in corporate speak, I do think it's actually a benefit to everybody involved here. We've ensured incumbents that they'll be protected from harmful interference so they can continue to innovate using the 6 gigahertz spectrum as they have currently. And for unlicensed operations, it's going to be a tremendous benefit as well in terms of innovation. And I think we also did it in a way to promote the innovative spirit in the future. There were some estimates, for example, that requiring some sort of AFC system indoors would have greatly complicated the use of this spectrum indoors. It could have added something like $100 or so to the cost of some of the routers, and that would have been a real gatekeeper, if not a block altogether, in terms of Wi-Fi 6 innovation indoors. And so both in terms of time and in cost, I think consumers are going to benefit from this decision. The last point I would emphasize on 6 gigahertz is something that Edgar talked about as well, which is that we are not done yet. In addition to our order, the Commission voted to explore possibilities for very low power devices in the 6 gigahertz band. VLP, of course, could enable a new and innovative generation of personal area network technologies with low latency, high capacity, and even all-day battery life. And so we think that these VLP devices could have a very promising future. And that's part of the reason why we have set up a further notice of proposed rulemaking to tease out some of the technical aspects of that so that we can take action, hopefully later this year, based on an informed record. And I think here, the potential is really limitless. If you think about some of the VLP devices that could help those with disabilities, could promote AR and VR gaming, all kinds of things that we can't even conceive today. And that's sort of the point, as Edgar made clear, that we don't know where innovation would take us, but the lesson of 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, I think, is instructive, that when you set the building blocks in place, people can construct them in very innovative ways that could not have been conceived when the building blocks were established. So very excited about the 6 gigahertz band, but I would like to move on, if I might, briefly to its next door neighbor on the spectrum chart, which is the 5.9 gigahertz band, also very important. Here, back in 1999, the FCC allocated 75 megahertz of spectrum for a service called Dedicated Short Range Communications, or DSRC. And the thinking back then was that this technology could enable ubiquitous transportation and vehicle-related communications. Now, unfortunately, the performance has not lived up to the promise over the last 20-some years. In fact, over 20 years later, most of the spectrum is not being used. It's not widely deployed, and to say that DSRC has evolved slowly is an understatement, especially in comparison to its cousin, Wi-Fi, which of course is the reason why we are all here. And in the meantime, a new wave of transportation technologies has started to emerge. And as a result, many people, including me, have started to ask whether this valuable spectrum, which is, after all, a public resource, is really being put to its highest valued use. In my view, it clearly is not. And that is why, after 20 years of seeing these prime airwaves largely lie fallow, I decided that the time had come for the FCC to take a fresh look at the 5.9 gigahertz band. And so last December, the FCC, again, unanimously, bipartisan support from all the commissioners, agreed with my proposal to end this uncertainty and to set the 5.9 gigahertz band on a new path for the deployment of new services. And specifically, we proposed to make available the lower 45 megahertz of the 5.9 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi, so that it could be joined with its neighbors just below that band for 160 megahertz wide channel, and to allocate the upper 30 megahertz for technology-related, transportation-related technologies, specifically a new technology called Cellular Vehicle to Everything, or CV2X, in the uppermost 20 megahertz, as well as a 10 megahertz band for DSRC or CV2X, depending on what automotive and other stakeholders think is appropriate. And so here, we've really seen some tantalizing glimpses of what punch this Wi-Fi spectrum in particular, that 45 megahertz band, could have for consumers. It may seem like a small amount of spectrum, but I actually think the last 3 months have proven the value, I think, of our proposal going forward. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the FCC has issued, I believe it's something like over 150 wireless internet service providers special temporary authority, or STAs, to allow them to use this 5.9 gigahertz spectrum on a temporary basis. We've allowed them to use it to meet the connectivity challenges, especially in rural and low income areas, places where there has not been as strong a business case to deliver connectivity. And the results here are incredibly impressive. Let me give you just a few examples. And you won't know the name, most likely, of many of these providers, but that I think is actually kind of the point, that they're the ones stepping up to use this resource. Aplex, based in Luckey, Ohio, saw a 30% increase in demand because of the pandemic. But using the 5.9 gigahertz band spectrum that we've given them a temporary dispensation to do has allowed it to increase its network's bandwidth by 50%. Netlink in Hudson Oaks, Texas, is using the spectrum to reduce interference and upgrade its speeds for over 2,000 subscribers in one fell swoop. Skynet 360 in Florida City, Florida, has been able to extend broadband services to over 100 homes in a rural area of the Everglades. And Intermax Networks in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, has dramatically reduced noise floors and has increased up to 75% its throughput in its network. This is all just using the spectrum over the last 3 months. And in this case, the few examples typify the many. They show the promise of the 5.9 gigahertz band for unlicensed use. And they reinforce my belief that the best course is to dedicate at least the lower 45 megahertz of the band exclusively for unlicensed operations like Wi-Fi. And so our approach rejects this false choice that has been posed by some, that we have to pick between automotive safety and Wi-Fi. Given the track record of the last 21 years, by providing dedicated spectrum for intelligent transportation systems, I think what we're able to do is allow them to continue to innovate, while at the same time giving a home to unlicensed innovators who are able to put that spectrum to its highest valued use. Now today, I know I've primarily focused my remarks on mid-band spectrum, which is of course critical to unlicensed innovation. But before I close, I want to give a brief look into the future. And for that, I think we need to look much higher. Last year in our Spectrum Horizons proceeding, we made over 21 gigahertz of spectrum above 95 gigahertz available for unlicensed use. And so to be clear, that's 21 gigahertz, not megahertz, of course. So we're talking about oceans of airwaves that are now available. Now, I know that some might be skeptical that these bands are practical. They might be too high to be practical. But I would note that the same was said of the 2.4 gigahertz band some 30 years ago, when the FCC made available what was once thought of as a junk band. And so here we set up a big sandbox for engineers, technologists, anyone thinking wild and crazy thoughts. And I'm really looking forward to what they might come up with in this band. And I'm optimistic that when the Wireless Broadband Alliance meets in 2040, 2050, speakers will be discussing the tremendous innovation that we've seen in the 116, the 174.8, the 185, and the 244 gigahertz bands, as crazy as that might sound right now. Anyway, speaking of, I know some of the innovators are probably in the audience. They're sick of tired of hearing of federal bureaucrats' remarks on this or that. So I'll turn it back to the August Tiago for questions. But just want to say thank you again for allowing me to be part of this audience. Thank you so much for your advocacy at the Commission and throughout the world on these issues. And joining with Edgar, I do hope that you, your families, your coworkers, and others in your communities continue to stay safe during this unprecedented disruption.
Thank you so much, Chairman Pai, for your kind words and speech. I would like to invite anyone that would like to make any questions to Chairman Pai, please use the question box and share any questions that you may have. And the same applies to the rest of the participants of the webinar. So JR, Derek, Eric, Matt, Edgar, feel free if you have any questions to Chairman Pai. I think we can take the advantage of having Chairman Pai on our event. I have just a couple of questions that I would like to share with you. I think it was as I said, a quite brave decision to be the world leader in moving forward with the additional unlicensed spectrum decision. I would like that. What was your feeling personally as making one of the most relevant decisions for unlicensed technologies lately? and what you see as the benefits for America, but as well setting the tone for the rest of the world to make as well a decision and move forward on such a drastic and important decision.
Well, thank you, or obrigado, I should say, Tiago, for the question. I would say number one, it was a challenge. And even yesterday, I testified before the United States Senate. And I got questions about this. Have you taken the steps necessary to protect incumbents from harmful interference? Of course, when there are incumbents in the band, they can always raise objections. Look, we are managing the power grid. We are responsible for public safety. We are delivering broadcasting over electronic news gathering services. We use on the 6 GHz band for wireless backhaul. Each of them can say, look, if we allow unlicensed operations indoor or outdoors based on the FCC's terms, these important functions that we conduct are going to be jeopardized. And to the uninitiated, that might seem a very serious charge. And so that's why from the very beginning, what I've told our team, and I think what I've told many advocates, you included, is that I will always focus on the engineering. Tell us what you think the facts are with respect to indoor and outdoor use. And I will take all of the political slings and arrows if necessary, if I think it's the right thing to do based on the facts. And that's exactly how it's played out. Because our Office of Engineering and Technology was able to work with you and so many other talented and dedicated advocates who were focused on the facts, we were able to get across the finish line a balanced product. Indoors, there were some who wanted 8 dB power levels, and we said, well, we think 5 based on the current record is the maximum we could do, but we'd be open to considering higher power in the future. Outdoors, there were some who said, well, we don't need AFC, but we thought, okay, at this time, let's make sure that we guard against any argument that the incumbents might have in student AFC system. And I think that allows me to go before Congress, before the American public, and say, we do have a balanced approach here. That's not to say we won't get criticism in the future. We've seen it in many other bands, the 5.9 gigahertz band, which I mentioned. We've already heard, oh, there are going to be thousands more car crashes if you allocate any more spectrum for Wi-Fi in that band. And so here too, we have to focus on the facts. Number one, that the spectrum isn't used. Number two, that DSRC is essentially an underused or underdeveloped technology. And number three, as I mentioned in my remarks, over the past 3 months, just the temporary access to the spectrum has allowed wireless internet service providers to really boost speeds and coverage for thousands of American consumers, too many of whom have been for too long on the wrong side of the digital divide. And so I'll keep getting into the ring, so to speak, and taking my swings. And I know that there are always going to be punches back, but at the end of the day, our foundation is a firm one, and it's the engineering work that you and so many others have done. With respect to your second question, the precedential effect, I think, is very, very important. And I was thrilled to see that my friends in Brazil my friend Leonardo in particular has been very forward thinking on licensed innovation, and there are many other countries too. And so to the extent that our decision can serve as a model to allow other agencies, other governments to take similar steps, that's going to be a game changer, because as Edgar put it well, the more harmonized some of the spectrum is, and the more harmonized some of our spectrum policies are, the better off innovators and consumers are going to be. So I'm really excited to see what this portends. And if you see, anyone who's on the call, if you see particular countries where the FCC can be helpful, let me know. I've got a really good relationship with my counterparts around the world, and I'm always helpful to put in a phone call or send in a letter to buck them up, to let them know that what they're doing is important and will create value for their constituents in the time to come.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Pai. Okay, I have one more question, and then I will open up if, I don't know, Derek, Matt, JR, or anyone from the audience has any question. Yeah, my second question, Chairman Pai, it's really, if you want to leave a message to the different players that are here on the webinar, especially on the service providers and the operators, that many of them are the ones that are going to buy and deploy this technology. So after such a challenge decision from FCC, is there any message that you'd like to leave to the service providers, the network providers, from your side?
Oh, definitely. First and foremost is that I strongly encourage those service providers to tell their story. And what I mean by that is, number one, participate in the FCC's proceedings. As I mentioned, we have an outstanding proceeding on very low power devices. Let us know what an impact that could make for your businesses. Same thing with the current proceeding for standard power outdoors and really low power indoors. It's very, very helpful to get your input. We can't proceed without a very informed record. And so I would strongly encourage you to submit technical analyses to the FCC to enable us to move forward. And externally, I would really urge you to tell your story not just to elected officials, but to the general public. Let them know what a difference this could make. I think some people, and I got a little bit of blowback on this as well, and I talked about the importance of the 6 gigahertz band. Oh, who cares if you're able to stream Netflix in higher definition? What difference does it make for kids to be able to play Fortnite deeper into the recesses of the nighttime? I mean, that's a kind of sarcasm I would get, but I think it's important for service providers to show that it's not just licensed spectrum that's important. Unlicensed spectrum is critically important to meet the demands of the current consumer. And I can only do that with my pulpit from a policy perspective. But if you're a service provider on the ground and you can say, look, this is what it would mean to my 10,000 customers, or this is the amount of people I could hire if I was able to build out my network further, or this is the amount of CapEx I could raise and invest in the communities, that's the real story that has some punch. And so stay engaged. And additionally, to the extent that you're able to do some of this work on the international stage too, let me know. I participated extensively in the ITU's World Radio Communication Conference, for example, and the 6 gigahertz band was one of the topics there. And to have service providers participating in that forum, making sure that my counterparts around the world know that there has to be a home for unlicensed in mid-band spectrum, that's critically important. When I see a question about how do you, I can answer it too in the chat box, or Thiago, if you want to take the lead.
Yeah, there is this question about the 5G summit. So was estimated at 800,000 small cell sites by 2025. And now with the plans to add additional Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E cells, gives that Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E now satisfy the IMT 2020 requirements and becomes a relevant part of a 5G strategy.
Yeah, so I would have to look again at what the IMT requirements, how it's worded. But what I will say is that I do think that Wi-Fi is going to be a critical complement to, or if not a component of our overall 5G strategy. I think when I joined the FCC 8 years ago, the standard line was that you've got to pick in any given spectrum band. It's either going to be licensed or it's going to be unlicensed, and the two are at loggerheads. And it's incredible in the span of less than a decade now that I have yet to talk to a wireless executive who sees Wi-Fi as the enemy. To the contrary, they see Wi-Fi as being critical to maintaining cellular networks, and especially the development of a 5G NR standard. I think that there's going to be a technical standard that allows 5G to use unlicensed spectrum too. They see it all as part of a mesh. So I'm really excited to see what some of the Wi-Fi 6 developments mean on the 5G side. And along with that, the question was also about infrastructure. I do think it supports some of our efforts in terms of speeding up the deployment of wireless infrastructure to the extent that we're going to need a lot more Wi-Fi routers and the like to be deployed outdoors. That dovetails nicely with some of our streamlining proposals. If you're not deploying a macro cell tower that's a couple hundred feet tall, it's just a bunch of Wi-Fi access points or small cells for licensed use. We want those to be relatively streamlined in terms of the approvals you have to get and the hoops you have to jump through and the like. So again, here too, I think it's a nice convergence of the unlicensed and unlicensed worlds in a way that helps us present a unified message as opposed to pick your favorite child message.
Yes, and I think some of the speakers of today, including J.R. Wilson and Derek Patterson, will talk about many of that convergence and how service providers are looking to that license and unlicensed reality, not anymore as let's say competitors, but sometimes with like best friends that they can optimize their investments, their deployments, the way that they deploy their services and maximize at the end of the day the ROI for their companies.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm excited to see what that means in the future. When I see another question about IoT.
Yeah, I see another, couple more questions. I see one about, let me see.
Like industrial IoT, and I see
industrial, the role of Wi-Fi 6E for industrial IoT.
I think it's going to be tremendous, and I actually think that industrial IoT will be on the earlier side in terms of some of the innovation that we see. I remember a couple of years ago, I met a startup in the Bay Area called Samsara that was pioneering some industrial IoT devices, and they forecast a time when one of their customers, Chobani, would be able to use some of these IoT devices to track the temperature in every single yogurt truck as it goes across the country to make sure it didn't ascend above a certain heat point, because that's critical for maintaining quality. And I asked them what one of the bottlenecks might be, and they said, well, number one, we have to rely on cellular networks, which might not have coverage, and even if we have cellular deals with a particular carrier or carriers, they might be cost prohibitive. But with 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi, now you've completely changed the game, and I think that it broadens the coverage, of course, but it also increases the range of industrial IoT use cases dramatically. And so I can imagine in the future that if you're operating a warehouse of some kind and there are certain IoT devices that you want to deploy, I mean, Wi-Fi is the natural home to be able to use that for. There's also, of course, licensed spectrum you could rely on as well, but I think that Wi-Fi 6 really gives a much richer range of possibilities than ever before. So even though it's not as sexy as a connected device that a consumer might use, I do think industrial IoT is going to be very innovative in the near future.
Yeah, definitely will play. I totally agree with you, Chairman Pai. Wi-Fi 6 will play a big element on the transformation and digitalization of industries and manufacturing, healthcare, education. Wi-Fi 6 will make a huge difference. There is one other question. I think we all know the answer, but asking if European Union and UK will adopt the 6 gigahertz. I don't know if Chairman Pai, you have been talking with your peers in Europe and UK, but maybe you can share just some of your thoughts.
Sure. So I've talked. It's been a while since I was able to talk to them. I believe I'm scheduled to talk to them in the next couple of weeks. And one of the points I was going to bring up was exactly this: is that we would love to work with our counterparts in BEREC. We interface mostly with BEREC, of course, although I do have some contacts with the European Union and the UK. But BEREC has been generally open to hearing some of our pitches on spectrum. And one of them I'd like to pitch is this one, that we've already seen a tremendous outpouring of support for it. And to the extent Europe would be willing to do it as well, I think it would help quite a bit. And I actually think it would help with some of the difficulties they might have been seeing on the 5G side, on the license side, where you've seen it's been a little more difficult to harmonize spectrum policies to make more spectrum available for 5G in some of the member states. But to the extent that they can make available a huge amount of spectrum for 6E, I think that'd be very helpful in helping them leapfrog some of those obstacles. But here too, by the way, if there are particular countries that you might think it would be helpful for us to talk to, let me know, because as I said, I only talk to them on a periodic basis, and you might know better in real time where the opportunity is.
Yeah, Chairman Pai, thank you a lot for that offer. And yes, in WBA, because we have a global presence, we are in touch with many regulators and policymakers, I don't know, from Singapore, from Korea, India. So I think if we join forces, could be very interesting. Very kind offer from you.
Yeah, and one of the unfortunate things about the pandemic, of course, is it's prevented me from doing that essential field research in Lisbon and Paris and Rome and Athens. I really want to be a public servant, but I'm even prevented from doing that critical travel. Someday, hopefully, when it's safe.
Yeah, Chairman Pai, thank you so much for your time and participate on this Congress from WBI. It has been a pleasure. Hope you enjoyed as well, and a big obrigado from Lisbon.
Well, obrigado again to you and to everybody participating, and keep up the great work. I really mean it. We would not have reached the results we've reached over the last several months, but for your advocacy. So keep it up.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so after this great conversation with Chairman Pai, I propose we move on the agenda and we talk a little bit about one of the topics that we just talked with Chairman Pai about convergence, heterogeneous networks, and 5G. And no one better than J.R. Wilson, that is Vice President of Tower Strategy and Roaming at AT&T, but as well Chairman of the WBA. Under JR leadership, JR always shared a very convergence perspective and strategy under his leadership. I can indicate some examples. So all the international data roaming packages combining Wi-Fi and cellular, and all the efforts on deploying Passpoint in the multiple Wi-Fi hotspots from AT&T in US. And I even remember many years ago when JR told me that he was the one that created that innovative data package for the Kindle. So for those of you that remember what is Kindle, so was under JR leadership that I think for the first time we saw a global data package that was very affordable and could be used anywhere in the world. So without further delay, welcome JR to the Congress.
Tiago, thank you for the introduction. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those that are in Asia. So I want to start by just thanking everyone for their participation today. Tiago, thank you for kicking us off and your leadership of the WBA. I'd also like to thank Edgar for his leadership of the WFA and the strong partnership that our two organizations have. Of course, Chairman Pai, it's a real honor and a privilege to have you here today. And thank you for your leadership of the FCC and your commitment to continue to drive innovation in technology and connectivity, including during these really challenging times. So let me jump into my topic. My topic is strategic network drivers, which in simple terms is the critical infrastructure that'll fuel growth and prosperity as we advance to deploying the next generation of technology. As we know, connectivity is no longer a luxury. We've seen this play out in real time, whether it be disasters like Hurricane Katrina, Maria, Irma, forest fires, or most recently, COVID. I experienced it firsthand in my role at AT&T, and I experienced it at multiple levels. For example, one of the business units that I manage is towers. In the US, there's not a lot of competitive tower facilities, yet at the same time, operators spend billions of dollars a year hardening our networks, building redundancy. But in an environment where there's a single tower and you've got every single operator co-located on it, you've effectively created a single point of failure. And of course, when those towers fail, which is often during times of disaster, you've created a very difficult situation. And if you're the customer, it really doesn't matter what caused it. You need to get service up, running as fast as possible. And of course, oftentimes it could be a difference of life and death, which is, of course, unfortunate. So it's simply not a luxury anymore. The wireless and wireline infrastructure that supply these services are critical to support our citizens, support a multi-trillion-dollar economy, public safety, and our first responders. It's a national security interest, and connectivity during the pandemic is essential now more than ever. Obviously, all the world has changed throughout the pandemic. At its peak, we saw audio and web conferencing up 400%, wireless calls, and this is on the cellular network, so not the Wi-Fi calling stat that Tiago shared earlier, but wireless calls generally up over 35%, texting up over 60%, together with a massive shift in network demands from urban to suburban. So while we're starting to see some of these trends flatten, this is the new normal that we're operating in. In addition to adding significant capacity to support these demands, and at times with very limited workforces, AT&T has stepped up to support our country, including thousands of public safety organizations and first responders through FirstNet. I want to take a second and just talk a little bit about FirstNet because I believe it's a strategic network driver. So FirstNet is a public-private partnership with the First Responder Network Authority. It was basically built by AT&T. It's the only nationwide high-speed broadband communications platform that's dedicated to and was purpose-built for America's first responders and the extended public safety community. It's an always-on, 24/7 priority and preemption, service across both data and voice communications. It's got a physically separate network core that's fully dedicated to public safety. And of course, there's significant government oversight and accountability. To put some context around COVID and FirstNet, in New York City, we had stepped up to help ensure EMS and other first responders have the interoperable connectivity they need. We equipped hundreds of ambulances with FirstNet-ready devices, including enhanced push-to-talk. We deployed FirstNet portable sites and new temporary in-building solutions to increase network capacity for first responders and emergency staff. We worked to ensure connectivity for the USNS Comfort in New York and the USNS Mercy in Los Angeles. In major medical centers and COVID testing facilities, FirstNet portable sites have been deployed to provide additional capacity and keep emergency personnel connected. These are just a few examples. The takeaway is, again, that FirstNet is critical infrastructure. It's critical to our nation, and it impacts everyone. In terms of the FirstNet build, we're making great progress. We're on track to complete 80% of the planned build, nearly 12 months ahead of schedule. It basically rides on Band 14, which is dedicated to public safety needs and where they need it, and protection against commercial traffic congestion for all FirstNet subscribers. It's pretty unique for our industry. There's over 12,000 public safety agencies and organizations that have subscribed over 100 devices, with more coming, and we've supported over 1.3 million connections. During COVID, we've also provided significantly discounted plans to various law enforcement, fire, EMS, in addition to nurses and physicians. Of course, no conversation on strategic network drivers would be complete without talking about 5G. At AT&T, we're building towards 5G in an evolutionary basis. First, we started with enabling faster speeds on our existing LTE network, which were up to 2 times faster than standard LTE, where customers get the benefit of what we've done with the equipment that's in their hands today. We're upgrading our network by enabling carrier aggregation, which basically adds more lanes to the highway. We're adding fiber to the network, both in terms of coverage and allowing higher peak speeds. And we're enhancing our core network to support lower latency. 5G is now available for consumers in 327 markets, covering approximately 160 million pops. When you think 5G, 5G runs on the sub-6 spectrum. Those radio waves do a great job of carrying calls and data sessions over a wide geographic area, while also providing very good in-building coverage. And millions of consumers are able to use these networks using several devices that are available today, including the Galaxy Note 10 Plus, the Galaxy S20 lineup, and the LG V60. Obviously, there's more coming, and we remain on track to reach nationwide coverage later this year. When you think 5G Plus, think millimeter wave. So it's ultra fast, but doesn't carry as far. 5G Plus works great as specific businesses in high traffic areas. So think manufacturing plants, hospitals, stadiums, high density metropolitan areas like Times Square as an example. We currently have ultra fast 5G Plus, a millimeter wave service on the air in parts of 35 cities, with more coming. I also want to talk about the access layer, because I think this is where it really comes together when we think about convergence together with Wi-Fi. So we basically break it into 4 quadrants. So quadrant 1, think largely macros. So this is 70 feet plus. This is also your big boomers, largely using the sub-6 spectrum. Again, this is for broad-based coverage. Quadrant 2 is the micro layer. So think more along the lines of low rooftops, primarily in urban and suburban locations. However, quadrant 2 is where we also begin introducing millimeter wave. So think both 5G and sub-6 together with 5G plus with millimeter wave. Quadrant 3, so this is sub 35 feet. This is what we call the street furniture layer. So think more poles and street lights. It's similar to quadrant 2, again, both sub-6 and millimeter wave, but this is where we also believe you start to introduce Wi-Fi, including Wi-Fi 6. And then the last quadrant is indoor venues, so think more like DAS, and this is the combination of all of them together with targeted edge compute. If you see the picture there of Cowboy Stadium, we actually have a Wi-Fi 6 trial going on right now. And for those of you that are familiar with AT&T, you may also be aware that we've struck several partnerships where we use Wi-Fi in places like airports and military bases, so indoor environments, together with outdoor environments like the Vegas Strip and places in New York, Manhattan, Times Square. I believe that as we evolve and technology continues to converge, we're no longer going to think in terms of macros, micros, picos, femtos, cellular Wi-Fi, licensed, unlicensed. And as we move to next generation core networks, which are access layer agnostic, we'll think more in terms of hubs and the access layer, with this being the access layer. So in closing, while 2020 has been an unprecedented year, and it's certainly not over, there's been a lot of challenges for our country and our communities and across the world. Never before has connectivity and providing connectivity without boundaries been so critical. And despite these challenges, it's incumbent that we remain steadfast. We continue to collaborate as an ecosystem, just like we're doing today. We adopt the right policies. We continue to invest, build, and grow. And I'm really excited about further advancing Wi-Fi together with making available more unlicensed spectrum. Wi-Fi is a critical technology, as is the role of the WBA, the WFA, together with the FCC. And I'm really looking forward to what the future brings. I'll leave you with one last thing. You know, I often hear the saying that content's king. Well, if content's king, then connectivity must be God. So thank you, and I look forward to the panel and questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, JR. So once more, I will invite the audience to put up any questions that you may have for JR, and as well to the rest of the panelists. While people is sharing some of the questions, JR, let me bring up a couple of questions that I would like to share with you. So you talk a lot about the license, the 5G network, and as well the importance of indoor coverage with Wi-Fi 6. And as Chairman Pai shared as well, many times I got in touch with many service providers that somehow they don't get the importance of combining both worlds, the license and then unlicensed. So can you share from your perspective why this heterogeneous network strategy is so important for AT&T?
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of go back to like, there's three basic motivations as a company. You know, it's to grow revenues, reduce expenses, and then deliver a superior customer experience. And sometimes they contradict each other, but oftentimes they're complementary. And I think that Wi-Fi and the introduction of Wi-Fi as part of the cellular environment is extraordinarily complementary. And I'll take the example of airports. You know, it seemed like we'd go through these cycles where every 6 months we were adding more capacity and adding more radios. And of course, you're going to have to continue to do that as demand grows. However, by introducing Wi-Fi, we were actually able to improve the customer experience because they're getting better signal, they're getting faster speeds, together with lowering costs. So we're able to improve the cost structure while at the same time offering, again, that better customer experience. AT&T, we actually went the next step, and internally, meaning inside of AT&T, we built a platform that basically manages traffic between the macro network and the Wi-Fi network. So as the macro network reaches peaks in congestion, we start to open up the Wi-Fi network again to optimize that customer experience.
Yeah, thank you, JR. Let me bring this question as well. So what's the AT&T position on the recent decision from FCC to make the 6 GHz band available for unlicensed use? Can you share some of more insights from AT&T point of view?
Yeah, so look, we applaud the FCC's decision to open up 6 GHz for unlicensed. Again, it's a Wi-Fi and unlicensed, it's a critical part of our business, and I certainly appreciate Chairman Pai and his comments about protecting incumbents and managing interference. At the same time, we do have a lot of 6 GHz that's providing really critical links to our network, and as a network provider, we're faced with attacks all day long. Sometimes they're malicious attacks, and they can be from a rogue hacker to sometimes even much more sophisticated than that. And of course, there's unintentional outages that relate to hardware or fiber getting cut. And we just felt like that when it particularly comes to automatic frequency control or coordination, that is a really important element. And of course, we appreciate etiquette. We know nobody wants to create interference or create a bad customer experience, but at the same time, sometimes etiquette's not enough and you have to go a little further and deeper. So at the same time, look, the FCC and AT&T, we work really closely together, and I know that we're in a lot of dialogue about the 6 GHz. But overall, I just want to make very clear, we applaud opening up 6 GHz for the unlicensed.
Yeah, thank you so much, JR, for your presentation and for your feedback. I'd like to propose that we move on the agenda. So thanks, JR. I'd like now to introduce the next speaker. So Dr. Derek Patterson, CTO of Boingo Wireless. So Derek has been a close friend of not only myself, but as well from WBI, a long-time supporter of WBI, known as well as Dr. D or Mr. Passpoint or Mr. Convergence. So Derek, welcome to the Congress. Looking forward for your presentation.
Great, thanks. Great to be here, and hello, and I want to reiterate a lot of what JR said. It's great to be with you. It's a trying time, and it's great to work with all of you guys to bring out what we're trying to do and allowing people to
a lot of these images
connect and having this session. So I'll see if we can mute somebody there. All right, did you get it?
So they're just like ads.
Hey, can you share? I'm having an issue right now for some reason.
Oh, sure, not a problem. Can you see my screen?
I can. It's always fun when you have these things. All right, so I don't see your screen yet. No.
Okay,
are you sharing?
So, let
Is
me
mine
try
showing
now. Let me share now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. It was going to make me disconnect and reconnect to share for some reason. Some kind of security thing popped up. All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm going to be talking, as shared, a little bit about convergence for the connected future, and really just the importance of where we are and where we're going. As Tiago shared, one of the key things that I've focused on for a long time in the WBA and in Boingo and in other areas is really just trying to figure out how we can get better at connecting individuals. And it's really our point and the goal of Boingo as well. So it's been a nice tie-in with what I'm trying to do and what Boingo is trying to do with, what we're doing in standards. And for the many of you who participated yesterday in the internal meetings for the WVA, some of this is going to be a repeat, but I just really think it's important for us to continue moving standards forward and being a part of these organizations with the FCC, with the Wi-Fi Alliance, with other organizations, and really just trying to push the envelope and creating these heterogeneous networks. So real quick on Boingo, we've been continuing to expand our breadth and our reach in being able to get people connected. We started off, as most of you know, and I've shared this before, in airports, where we were connecting 3% of the people on a retail offering. And we realized when I joined Boingo that was not connecting people. It was not making, connectivity essential and meeting the needs. And so we changed that model quite a bit over the last few years. And now what our goal is to just really focus on getting people connected. And so we've expanded that connection from airports to multifamily apartments, which we're really focused on right now, of course, with the pandemic, trying to make sure people have great connectivity. And then also focusing on the military, which is a very important area. What's happening in the military is soldiers and airmen and Marines are still being transferred from location to location, and they're being quarantined for 2 weeks as they move from location to location because they have a job to do, important job, the security. And so they quarantine them for 2 weeks, and we're providing quarantine barracks and opportunities for them for free connectivity through Wi-Fi, as well as point-to-point radios and other licensed technologies to make sure that they're connected. So I appreciate the help from, my partners in crime in making that happen, both at Boingo and then also at the carriers and at the venues that we're working with to bring that connectivity. One of the things we continue to focus on is what 5G is going to look like in the future. And so you can back up one. So Boingo's focused on trying to figure out how to make sure that we provide the best connectivity by deploying 5G, Wi-Fi 6, and IoT networks across all of our different venues. And so we've been deploying those, focusing on all spectrums working together and noticing that each spectrum has a role to play. Each technology has a role to play in being able to provide a truly connected experience. And we do that by staying neutral, and that's a very unique position to be in sometimes when you're trying to stay neutral. There's a lot of different players that you're working with, whether it's an MSO or an MNO or the venue itself. And it's just trying to handle all the different multiple technologies, all the different multiple business needs. And as JR said, it's trying to reduce OpEx, increase revenue for everybody, and then have that great customer experience across all those different influencers who are influencing that, that build and that experience that you're trying to create there. The other thing is really just making sure that we focus on how do we influence the 5G era through standards and leadership positions, like with the WBA, where I sit here with you today, or CBRS or GSMA or 3GPP or whatever those groups are, the FCC, to make sure that we get something through the standards that moves beyond just connectivity, but really moves to focusing on that experience that we want to create. So in the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about that vision and how it's evolved. So there's a vision that I've been trying to push forward for a few years, and that vision is a call for convergence. And most of you have heard me talk about this before. Probably about 3 years ago, we really pushed out the idea that when the argument was going on between Wi-Fi and cellular and licensed and unlicensed and shared license was coming about, we felt it was important for us to come out and make a stance and share this manifesto of this rallying cry that it's not about one versus the other. It's about really us all working together and creating a converged and collaborative environment so that access networks move, like what we've done with all of the other technologies that we've seen evolve. You know, when you think about compute and storage, they've evolved quite a bit in the last 20 years, and they've been able to evolve because we've been able to collaborate and create environments that meet those needs of everybody. So really, convergence allows us to offer more throughput, more latency at a lower cost, and that's important. So when we look at the convergence roadmap, we started off in the past, we were focused on macro towers, and JR talked about that a little bit. It was really just more of a coexistence where we were building large towers and we were putting multiple providers or multiple MNOs on a single tower, where it was allowing us to have great coverage, reduce some of the costs, but we weren't really getting the densification that we wanted. And then again, as JR said, everybody's putting their eggs in one basket, and if something goes down, all of a sudden you lose everybody's connectivity. So then we started introducing some of these other densification methods, DAS, small cells, and Wi-Fi, where we could end up getting the antenna closer, and then there's more basically antennas. So then therefore, when we have challenges, you know, an AP goes down, I've got enough access points or other connectivity that I'm not going to end up losing all of my connectivity in that area. And then we add additional users. We have DAS systems with multiple carriers on them, and we were really creating that densification. That densification came at a heavier cost sometimes because we're still bringing in multiple radios, different baseband units, different technologies for each of the different players, and they're ending up having to coexist together. But then they also had their own separation to be able to maintain that kind of uptime that we wanted to have in those situations. So when we look to the future and we look at what convergence is going to look like, what I've been, and you're ahead of me again, what I really want to focus on is how are we going to end up making technology and spectrum more available by being able to not think about coexistence anymore, but start thinking about co-integration. And that's something that we're working on at the WBA. How do we develop technology that co-integrates together so that when I put in a network that is doing Wi-Fi, that it knows that the macro is full, like JR said, or when I'm putting in a CBRS network or an LAA network, a better example, on the same frequency that I have Wi-Fi, that the Wi-Fi knows that the LAA network is there, and just like the LAA network knows that the Wi-Fi network is there. So how do we move towards that co-integration and make more spectrum available by having our network access layers integrate together, and then taking advantage of all these new technologies like 5G NRU, CBRS, Wi-Fi 6, and Passpoint, and really putting them together instead of having them just coexist. So for the next slide, thank you. What we do know is that as we look at these different technologies, there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of different power and capabilities that you can get out of one. So we know that Wi-Fi, with its larger channels, it has a lot of opportunity to do great traffic capacity and should be used in a lot of those situations. What's coming with some of the new millimeter waves is that same kind of traffic capacity. And so you're going to see that these really converge, and then it's really just going to be about how do I end up making them work together and co-integrate together. And so standard bodies like the WBA, we see the opportunity. This diagram was created by the WBA and a bunch of others involved in the WBA. But what it does show is that we see the opportunity, that there's some similarities here, and it's really about recognizing and working with those together to really create the vision. So what does the vision look like when we get there? So the next slide, please. When we get there to true co-integration, then we change our focus a little bit. Next slide. We end up focusing in on not anymore the technology, but we focus in on what we're trying to create. We focus in on the venue, on the experience. And then what we do is we apply the right spectrum, the right technology, and the right deployment model bringing in the cost and the experience, right? The revenue and the experience that we're trying to create into that deployment model to be able to connect people and things and create that personalized network that everybody wants when they are at home, when they're at the airport, when they're in their stadiums. They want that personal network that lets them get to their things and be able to experience what they want to experience as they're a part of that digital and physical experience that they're within. So next slide. So really then it's really about focusing on the experience. It's not about focusing on any technology, and it's about changing us from talking about 5G as a technology to really talking about 5G as an experience. What is the experience we're trying to create? And then applying those different technology aspects, those access networks, that technology to create that 5G experience. And when we move towards 5G is no longer marketing towards a certain technology, and we move it towards focusing on the experience that we're trying to create and then applying that technology, then we get to true 5G. And I think that that's one of the things that we've been talking about for a long time. When you think 3 years ago, it was bad to say 5G if you were a Wi-Fi person. And I've been kind of pushing it forward every few months. Okay, let's push it a little farther. Let's push it a little farther. And hopefully we'll get to a point where we say, hey, it's no longer about the technology. It's about that 5G experience. And that's really what this push on this time that I'm going to be on this virtual stage is about. It's about making that push to say, okay, let's create the 5G experience, and let's not be afraid of saying 5G if we're a Wi-Fi person, and let's not be afraid of saying Wi-Fi if we're talking 5G. So moving on to the next slide, what does that move us to? Well, what that moves us to is it moves us towards, now that we've got that experience created, that we end up to look at the network again, and we start going, okay, I have this 5G radio experience, which could include all these different technologies, licensed, unlicensed, and shared technology paradigms with all of these different frequency bands. And then what I'm really trying to create is a network as a service model, so that I end up treating that access layer so that it's available at the low band, the mid band, and the high band all the time. And I'm not concerned about whether it's licensed, unlicensed, or shared. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm delivering that 5G experience. And then we create this true network as a service, like what we've done with compute, like what we've done with storage, like what we've done with a lot of other platforms. We're now creating this future service-enabled platform for connectivity. Next slide. So, and then what we do is we move away from this idea that spectrum sharing the way it was done today, where we had this evolutionary path where we were saying, okay, I'm going to do LTU and LAA, and they're going to step into the Wi-Fi area, or I'm going to do CBRS and LSA, and they're going to step into certain areas of this new shared, where I have some kind of spectrum monitor system that helps me make sure that's connected. And we move towards this revolutionary path where co-integration really exists, where we end up having a flexible new radio framework where sharing of spectrum works, because we're aware of the different technologies that are using that spectrum. We have time sync and coordination sharing happening between different technologies, a guaranteed quality of service across those that's unique, that's the same or similar. So those same QCI levels we're used to in cellular, they're now part of the future QCI levels that are part of our networks, whether there's licensed, unlicensed, shared, Wi-Fi, CBRS, et cetera, LTE, 5G. And then really just focusing in on how we end up doing that. And that's where we're moving towards, and hopefully the future that we see as we move towards this revolutionary aspect. The next step then, of course, is on the next slide, is then now that we've solved the access layer, the next challenge is how do we solve the identity management layer, right? So without proper identity, spectrum sharing and roaming, you have friction because you don't know whose identity to use and what identity is being the individual wants to use. They might have multiple identities. And so the objectives here is to try to create a seamless, private, and secure way of doing that. And we're on again, a path with the WBA. We pushed forward Passpoint. We started saying, okay, we're going to end up taking a model that allows us to enable MNOs, and it's primarily used by MNOs, and we have standards in there for other ways of connecting. But now MNOs can use their same SIM-based identity management credentials very simply to get onto Wi-Fi networks. So that was an important part of this evolutionary path of identity management. But what we're now doing is we're taking that forward with open roaming in the WBA, and we're saying, okay, now I'm going to end up moving that towards more identity providers and more ways of creating those identities. And we're going to talk about that more on Friday. So I hope you join us for our webinar on Friday. But the idea is to create outcomes where we have collaboration between everybody so we can focus on the best practices for security and policy and end up creating guidelines, standards-based, that allow us to develop an alignment across multiple identity providers that allows us to remove that friction today that we have of understanding which credential gives you access to a network. And then last, one of the last things that we need to realize to make sure this works is we have to, next slide, Tiago, is prioritize the quality. Because if we create great access networks that are co-integrated, we now have identities that allow us to understand when we're connecting, what identity we're using to connecting. If we don't maintain and understand that there's a difference of quality expected by different identities, by different people, then we end up struggling with being able to create an economical as well as results-driven connection and experience for that individual or that venue or whoever's involved in getting that connection. And so defining tiers of quality is an important part of what we're also doing in open roaming, and we'll talk about more on Friday. But we need to recognize that not all networks are going to be the same. Not all of them need to be the same, but we need to end up identifying the differences between those networks so that we can end up creating the appropriate connection for the right use case, the right venue, the right person, the right device that needs to get connected. And then the next thing is we need to really focus in on virtualization. It's an important part of making all this happen. It allows us to be able to switch out and move functions faster. Virtualization is becoming kind of an old term. We're moving towards other terms like open and containers, but it's still a very important concept that we want our networks to function and run as software. And that allows us to have that flexibility and more control and be able to adjust that we need to be able to create these co-integrated networks of the future with these multiple different identities and these multiple different levels of quality that we might be delivering. So in final thoughts on conversion and how we collaborate together. And I can't see your slides now, but I hope it's still there. We need to really focus on the experience, right? So focus in on that 5G experience of what we're trying to create for the venue, for the individual. We need to share our networks. We need to recognize it's no longer about creating networks that are so separate. There's got to be some kind of a sharing aspect to the way we create that, at least if it's in some kind of standard, whether it be in the identity, the quality, or the technology. And then Last, we need to identify, visualize, and automate all of our stuff through focusing in on software and how software and network work tighter together to be able to create this environment. So with that, I'm open to Q&A, and you can hit the next slide for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Derek, for your presentation. Let's go ahead with one question that I received here on the question box. So, using Wi-Fi for in-building access network that offers a more cost-efficient offer and leverage existing capacity. Do you see any need for extensive small cell 5G deployments, or is just Wi-Fi good enough to cope with any demands on capacity?
You know, I think it boils down to the quality that you're trying to deliver, right? And if you're delivering a quality that recognizes that you're in a listen before talk situation, and then Wi-Fi works really well, and you can end up continuing to use it. And if you don't end up hitting capacity issues, if you're delivering something where you got to deliver an SLA, then you need to end up having some kind of possibly licensed, shared license, or LT control-based solution. A lot of times, what I think is important is there's multiple different access networks, and sometimes what we do is we treat all of the networks as access networks for individuals, and we think that we should just use that for everything. And the reality is there's lights, there's other things that need to be connected, and when you want to connect those other things, they might not need all that capacity. And growing and creating a separate VLAN, which you can do, and then segmenting that way, there's possibilities there, but why not take advantage of some cheaper way to do it? So why not, you know, if I need to connect lights, why not use something in the sub 1 gigahertz and use something like LoRa, which we're talking about inside the WBA. There's an advantage of using LoRa. It's also cheap and efficient, and it's efficient at that lower bandwidth, and you don't have to put up as much antennas. When we put up CBRS, for example, in Dallas Love Field, we only needed 13 antennas to get the capacity we needed for the operations people. It wasn't, we could have went and added a lot, you know, probably 30 or 40 more Wi-Fi access points and done that separate same thing, and you know, added an additional VLAN. But by adding CBRS and giving them their own private channel, dedicated channel through CBRS, we didn't have to add that much more. So it's really about looking at the overall experience and the design and recognizing I've got more than just a hammer to use. So let's go figure out which tool I should be using for this specific use case of connectivity.
Yeah, and
unfortunately, that's the way we have to do it today, because we coexist, we don't co-integrate. And co-integration is at the first step, where we're doing that co-integration at the core right now. We're doing it in our data rooms, but eventually we'll be doing that also at the access layers.
Yeah, very quickly, and because we are already behind schedule, but very quickly, want to get your thoughts on coexistence of Wi-Fi 6E and 5G and RU. So yeah, as for Boingo, as a neutral host provider, how you guys see that coming up?
Well, I think it's important. I'm excited about 5G and RU. The specs coming out at the end of July, and I think that we'll be deploying some 5G. I think we'll probably initially deploy it just because I think the cost paradigm is going to be a little bit higher. We'll initially probably deploy it in cases where it makes sense, because it is going to, I think it's going to have a higher cost, because you still have the core cost, which is a little bit unique, and unfortunately core costs have not come down yet, and the way cores are being priced out today, there's a cost per connect and a cost per user usually, where they need to change that, so it's a cost per node. And most of the models don't fit that. And so we're going to have to see that change. But I mean, I'm excited about seeing that change, because I think the industry is going to, the market always writes things like this. So I think the market will write a lot of this stuff, and we'll be able to see 5G NRU hopefully come down in cost so it can be more widely used and hopefully help push Wi-Fi along as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek. Fantastic presentation on convergence. So I propose we move forward. Our next speaker, it's Matt McPherson, wireless CTO at Cisco. Matt, big welcome to the Wireless Global Congress with this virtual version. The audience is all yours.
Thank you, Thiago, and I really do appreciate you having me today. It's already been an incredible day, and you know, just listening to Chairman Pai and some of the leadership that he's demonstrated. I think in the U.S., but I think also for
Sorry,
around.
Matt, we are not seeing your slides. I don't know if you are sharing two different screens.
It's not sharing the screen. In the I think Sarah has to give me access.
We did practice.
I think we see
Yeah,
your
we
screen,
actually
but
practiced, yeah.
we don't see the PowerPoint.
Okay. Yeah, let me see if I can fix that. So hang on one second. How about now?
Yes, perfect.
Do you see a full page?
Yes, we see a full page.
We see your,
Okay.
yeah, that's better.
And I'm just moving other windows out of the way. So 1 second. Okay, good. I think we're all set then. So again, I just wanted to re-articulate the thanks to Chairman Pai. It's always great to have Edgar here. It's great to see multiple different organizations working together, the FCC, the WFA, the WBA, some of the partnerships that we have with the CBRS and what's coming out of IEEE, what's happening over at GSMA and 3GPP, just to name a few of the organizations. And, I think, just listening to Derek and JR go over and discussing some of the things that's happening around convergence, convergence is happening in multiple ways, isn't it? It's happening from a spectrum standpoint. It's happening architecturally. It's happening in the stacks. And guess what? It's happening in some of the standards and forums bodies as well. So it's always a privilege to come and speak at this particular event, because I think the WBA actually represents an organization that looks to pull some of these other efforts together and to actually connect some of the dots. I hope everyone is staying healthy. I have to admit I miss physically getting together with everybody. It's always exciting to go to different places and to have a chance to get with folks over dinner and to have a beer. So I would have to admit that I miss some of the social component, but I guess we are definitely bringing collaboration services to new heights. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening in Wi-Fi 6 and what we're seeing is some of the trends that our enterprise environments and our service providers have to deal with going forward. We see these new technologies like Wi-Fi 6, we see 5G, we see what's happening with the new spectrum that's opening up. And I'll talk about this in a slightly different context, because I do think the use cases for wireless are expanding. JR was mentioning earlier that it's an expectation. We expect to be connected to wireless all the time. It's an expected resource, and you know what? As soon as we're not connected, we tend to feel it. And what do? We start looking for that connection. So I want to talk a little bit about Wi-Fi. How do we make it more reliable, and how do we make it more deterministic? So you've seen this slide. I've used it before, just as an introduction. Cisco monitors, of course, through its VNI and the studies that we do, some of the analytics or some of the changes that we're seeing in the market. And so I thought I would just start here just to show the incredible shift that we're seeing from a performance standpoint, the growth in performance, the fact that people are mobile most of the time. You know, we show a young lady here in the picture, and it's sometimes I think it does have a little bit to do with youth. Our new office environment, it's all open. No more the walls around all the office space or the masses of cubicles. It's open. It's about collaboration. But what we're finding is that this next generation, as they're coming into the industry, they expect to be connected all the time. They're mobile most of the time. In fact, over 72% of the time, they're not sitting behind their desk. So this mobile component, and especially as we're talking about heterogeneous networks and how we make them work together, starts to become just really critical, really important. We all know that the services are going into the cloud. Over this next year, Cisco has been monitoring some of the activity and the exercise of cloud resources, and we see that over 94%, I mean, that's pretty much everybody is putting their services into the cloud. And so if we have this situation where people are going mobile and the services are going in the cloud, then what happens here is that you're coming into access networks. Maybe you own that access network, maybe you don't. You're going to a cloud resource, maybe you own that cloud resource, maybe you don't. Maybe you're just running some software or something that you've licensed. And so now the path through the network is changing. And this gets into that message, I think, that Derek was giving, that in order to provide the connectivity, this always-on connectivity, this ability to provide the best connection anytime, anywhere, to the most people for those applications that we're running, whether they be locally on your device or they be out there in the cloud, really crosses boundaries. It crosses enterprise and service provider boundaries, and it crosses boundaries when it comes to the stacks, 5G and Wi-Fi 6. So I think that we're going to see a great deal of development happening in this area. And so it's always great to see the WBA really focusing on how better to combine these technologies together to serve not only the users, but the operators and the IT departments that are deploying these networks. Today, I want to focus a little bit more this time around on industrial IoT or IoT in general. This year, we are slated to hit 26 billion IoT devices going on the network. What's interesting about this is that if we look at some of these charts, we haven't even turned the J curve yet. We're just starting to ramp up IoT. We haven't seen the aggressive, the real acceleration that's coming in IoT yet. So we're just getting going. When you calculate that, that's 127 new devices connected onto the internet every second. So this is a real challenge. These are some of the things that we have to deal with these next generation architectures. Solving some of these megatrends, some of these things that are happening. I'd like to discuss this in 5 different pillars. One is this next generation access, what's happening in Wi-Fi 6, 5G, what's happening in spectrum, how do we get to determinism, how do we provide reliability, assurance and automation, how do we make this much, much easier to manage, how can we push policy throughout the network, how can we cross boundaries between network ownership, or sometimes what we think as roaming. This problem of onboarding, a problem that really from an LTE or 5G perspective is solved. How do we solve this onboarding problem in a Wi-Fi type community where there's today approaching 400 million hotspots out there around the world, and within the next 2 years we'll cross over 600 million hotspots. That's a scale problem. How do we address that? And so we see the WBA really focusing on new technologies like open roaming, which applies proven technologies like Passpoint at a much larger scale. And then convergence, we just talked about it. And then another one, that upper stack, that location and analytics. How do we provide this next generation of services in an intelligent way so that we can get the experience? So I'm going to talk a little bit about next generation access and what we're seeing happen with some of these stacks. There's an explosion of devices going onto our networks. I was giving some of the analytics before, but if you look at this chart, this billions of devices, it's interesting to note that the number of devices going on the network across the board, all kinds of devices, is growing at about 10% CAGR year on year. And so we can see it. We know, for example, there were 14 billion Wi-Fi devices added to the network just last year. But if you look across the device types, you see tablets, you see PCs, you see other types of devices like TVs, streaming devices, things that aren't smartphones, things that are smartphones. But one that I really wanted to take note of that we need to be aware of is, again, this IoT one. Machine-to-machine or IoT is going from 33% of connected devices to 50% in just the next couple of years. In fact, if you look at this chart on the right, machine-to-machine or IoT is growing at nearly 20% CAGR. So a lot of that growth is really coming to this space. So when we're looking at the next generation technologies, when we're looking at mobility, when we're looking at how we do roaming, when we're looking at how we do automatic and secure connectivity, this isn't just about the smartphones. And you know, look, smartphones is a huge part of our life and very important to each and every one of us. But it's also this new machine-to-machine, these intelligent devices that are just connecting in all sorts of different verticals for different purposes. And in fact, if you look at this, there's a couple of reports that have come out. ABI showed a report that if we look at connectivity in industrial IoT, for example, that within the next couple of years, that the technology that was mostly wired today is going to start to go more and more wireless. And in fact, that's going to get more aggressive as we go forward. And that's where we get into this next generation of manufacturing. And that's where we start to get into what we would call agile manufacturing, so that you can refit a manufacturing plant in a very easy way without having to recable everything or push things around. Or you can have robots that move machinery into the right place to do that type of manufacturing without having to worry about pulling a cable around behind it. And so these types of capabilities require this next generation of the stack, as well as what Chairman Pai is doing in opening up the spectrum. In fact, if you look at on the right here, Harvard Research did a really excellent report just talking about some of the segments, not only industrial IoT, but some of the segments that have real-time requirements, or what you might say is mission critical requirements. You see it in transport, at military, you see it in warehouses, oil and gas, you see it in power, utility, mining, and even some that you would traditionally call regular enterprise, like hospital and lab environments, where mission critical is quite important, because you might be connecting an IoT device like a heart monitor or an infusion pump or a breathing apparatus or things like that. In fact, it's quite a big market. There's over 14 million global sites looking to implement private networks. Those can be managed by an SP, or they can be managed locally, that need these types of services from that next generation network. So what is deterministic wireless? How do we get to this solving unpredictable latency? You know, if we look at previous generations of Wi-Fi, it isn't uncommon that you would get into these environments that were very dense. Take a stadium, take a train station. Derek at Boingo, very familiar with the density involved at the airports. And what happens is that if you have an environment where there's heavy utilization of the network and there's a high density of devices, in previous generations of Wi-Fi, what would happen is that it would start to collide. And you know, Derek was talking about listen before talk. What happens in that situation is that you always hear something. And in fact, in these open environments, the APs are even hearing adjacent APs, and that RF starts to get cluttered, and you can't get on the air interface. And guess what? Determinism or reliability kind of goes out the door. Well, that's really changing, and that's changing in the realm of the next generation of 5G, driving higher densities at lower delay characteristics, lower jitter, but also in Wi-Fi 6. because it has an ability on the network side to actually schedule the devices, and so far more control than we had before. So in order to achieve this, there's really two things that we're looking at. What are the capabilities of the stack? And that could be Wi-Fi, that could be a 5G stack, that could be other stacks, depending if you're applying LoRa or 15.4 type capabilities. So what are the stack capabilities that you need in order to achieve this? But then there's also this other realm of spectrum and interference management. How do you control who's using the spectrum and when, and how do you share? And there's all sorts of work that's going on in this right now. For example, how do we do unlicensed coexistence? Chairman Pai and the FCC, they've just opened up 1200 megahertz in the US in 6 gigahertz. Well, you know what? Wi-Fi is going to be there, but we're going to see other stacks there too. We're going to see stacks like 5G go into that 6 gigahertz space. So how do we determine fairness in that? And how do we make sure that they're not interfering with each other? How do we leverage both energy detect or preamble to detect so that these things can work together and they can work together very synergistically and mitigate some of those otherwise collisions that we might run into? This new swath of shared or locally licensed spectrum that's coming available in the US and Germany and France, what's opening up by Ofcom over in the UK, what's happening over in Korea, what we're starting to see go into Asia. So we have to look at both aspects of this, and we have to combine both of these together, because if we can control the interference domain from a spectrum standpoint, we can do that intelligently. And if we can apply intelligent scheduling capabilities of the stack, then what we can do is we can achieve that next level of reliability across the network and that next level of what we call determinism, so that we know what we can expect as we're connecting not only people, but we're connecting these machines or these devices to the network. And the good news is this, I mean, you know, Chairman Pai talked about it. There was some discussion on this earlier. We believe that the US is leading here. They're, when it comes to opening up 6 gigahertz, they're the first one to announce a very aggressive plan. The European Union is also being very aggressive here, and we expect to see additional spectrum open up as these proceedings come forward over the next couple of months. And so with these beachheads, what's happening is that around the world, we're starting to see more and more aggressive adoption or a push to open up some of this spectrum. So this is good. What this means is that even in unlicensed environments, we can have much better control over that interference domain so that we can achieve some of this reliability and some of this determinism that I've been talking about. So all good progress moving in the right direction. I've only presented this once before, but I thought I would put it here too, just to give you a little bit of an idea of just how significant opening up 1200 megahertz is. Here we show typical deployments. This is looking across the broad range of Cisco customers, depending on the density of their deployment, how wide the channels are that they configure, how wide the channels are for the radio resource management. And again, this radio resource management is trying to protect against these collisions and APs stomping on other APs and too many devices trying to talk at once. And what we see is that for deployments, by and large, 20 and 40 megahertz is still very much the dominant width, and so you're limited by the overall bandwidth that you can get through in this, and even at that channel width, you start to hear other devices, and we start to see this congestion really happen. Now you can configure 80 megahertz on a 5 gigahertz channel and with existing AC. But what's going to happen is that you're going to see, especially in some of these contended environments like malls, you're going to see a lot of interference. But now, if we apply the exact same rules to radio resource management, if we apply the exact same separation, what we see here is that in this next generation, 40 and 80 megahertz will really become quite common. In fact, you may have heard me say that 80 megahertz with this 6 gigahertz opening up is really the new 20, and 160 is really the new 40. What this means is that this next generation of applications, whether it's local and your handset is talking to intelligent glasses for AR, VR, or these collaboration services, which are becoming far more rich and having much higher bandwidth requirements. These are all easily accommodated in this new spectrum. So this is all good news. Now, if we look at this, sometimes there's a bit of a misnomer, because sometimes what we do is we look at 5G and we look at 5G NR and licensed, and we say all the aspects of 5G NR around determinism and delay characteristics and everything is applicable even if we go into some of these other spaces like 6 gigahertz. But we have to realize here that that's not necessarily the case. If 5G NR is coming into 6 gigahertz, then it has to deal with other radios that could be in other stacks that could be using 6 gigahertz. And as we start to go and see some of these locally licensed pieces of spectrum that are opening up around the world, can NR go right in there and immediately take advantage of it? And it's absolutely like yes. So to what Derek was saying earlier, depending on your use case, depending on your country, depending on where you are, depending on the current availability of equipment, you can definitely apply this next generation technology to get some of that determinism that you're looking for. What's interesting is that we're currently doing an investigation over in the WBA to look at Wi-Fi 6, even in some of the locally licensed spectrum. And although Wi-Fi 6 is still getting its legs under it in improving OFDMA scheduling, for example, it hasn't been nearly as aggressive from a regulatory standpoint. But if you were to address some of this regulatory issue and you were to open the stack, and by the way, if you look at things like Ofcom and what they're opening up over in the UK, it doesn't specify a stack. So you can use some of these stacks. And this is good because now what we can do is we can further converge, not only between licensed and unlicensed, but also in this locally licensed. This means that we can get a much more deterministic, a much more reliable result as we go indoors and out, and as we apply these different radio technologies moving forward. So it's lots of movement here. And then last, and I'll wrap up and I'll take some questions. What does this look like? I mean, we have all these different kinds of spectrum. So if you look at the key along the top, you've got wired, and a lot of the deterministic type of places, whether that be industrial IoT or some mission critical type implementation, we see that actually a lot of wired still being used today. And there's always a component of wired that's quite significant because, in fact, Cisco just acquired a company where the switches are orders of magnitude faster than your typical Ethernet switch. And that's because in some cases, the delay characteristic is so tight, you're even pushing the boundary of wired, right? And so these industrial type integrations, we see a lot of wired there today. We also see a lot of Wi-Fi, and we see a lot of the previous generation Wi-Fi, and we see some frustration in those spaces because as Wi-Fi got more and more popular and they started to connect more and more devices to it, well, guess what? It wasn't quite as deterministic as they hoped. And so if you look at this next bar, determinism, our destination Wi-Fi, right? We got Wi-Fi 6 coming in, we got Wi-Fi 6E coming in, and we have these new scheduling capabilities, this ability to drive reliability and delay characteristics down. We have this investigation around LLS. And we can see that we can solve some of these problems depending on what they're trying to do with 6 and with 6E. If you look at destination convergence, then what that means is how do we leverage this new radio, this 5G new radio, and how do we combine that with some of the things that are happening around the Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi space? Most manufacturing and most of these industrial type implementations, most of these mission critical type applications, when you go to these venues and you talk to them, are they interested in putting in 5G? Many of them really are. When they put in 5G, are they saying you're not going to put in Wi-Fi? Almost none of them say that. So what's going to be very common here is both of these technologies being applied into different aspects of the problem that they're trying to solve in that particular venue. And so again, this convergence, this heterogeneity that we need to apply in order to do this is is very, very important. And you notice on some of these arrows, I put a question mark. How much of it will be 5G? How much of it will be Wi-Fi 6? How much of it will still be wired? I think we have questions there, and that's why it's important that as we go forward, that an organization like the WBA is doing the studies that they are, that we're doing the trials that we're doing, like at Metis and many of these other types of environments, so that we can better understand just how well we can meet the requirements of those types of implementations, so that we can improve this as we go forward. And then I'll just wrap with saying that I feel like we've just sort of whet the appetite here. I mean, we could do a deep dive in almost any of these areas, but we are taking a chance. We will be doing a 50-minute panel on Friday, where we're going to bring in a big operator. We're going to bring in AT&T. We're going to have Google on the panel. We're going to have Samsung on the panel. We're going to have Boingo on the panel. We'll have a representative from Cisco on the panel. And we're going to talk about convergence of these technologies and how the different parts of the industry is looking at this convergence so that we can solve this problem going forward. So it should be a really fun discussion. I hope you'll join us on Friday, and we'll dig into this a little bit more. So with that, Tiago, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. And I'm pretty sure that on Friday we'll have a great panel. Let's bring up, as I saw your presentation, Matt, immediately come up one question in my mind. You talked about those billion of devices for IoT and machine to machine. So what are your thoughts on how can we solve the problem of onboarding all those devices and to identify them? Because if as you said, on this multi-access environment, how can we onboard all those billion of devices? What are the mechanisms that we can think about it, and how to identify? How can we have identities for all those different types of devices that many times they are from the same person, physical person, but I have multiple devices. If we are looking to the consumer or even an enterprise, it can be one enterprise with multiple thousands of devices. I'd like to get some of your thoughts and share with the audience.
Yeah, we actually done a lot of work on this, and there's multiple different groups in the standards bodies that are looking at this extensively, because the realm of IoT is quite broad. You have very what I would say call simple stack type devices like a light bulb or a doorbell or a switch or a sensor that oftentimes don't have the compute or the memory to do very sophisticated stacks. And then all the way on the other side of the spectrum, you have very sophisticated, very expensive equipment. You go into industrial, some of these robot arms and some of this automation is, those machines, for them to be agile and then to be reconfigured to manufacture different things, they're very expensive and have quite sophisticated communication capabilities. In fact, if you extend into the connected vehicle space, you could almost look at it as these new connected vehicle capabilities as the vehicle being a big smartphone you get on and it's on wheels. And we're working with the connected vehicle space, even with open roaming, because as you drive around, as you're getting gas, as you park in a parking lot of a hotel, or if you go to a stadium, or if you go to the airport, you're in the parking lot, there's terabytes of data that these vehicles are uploading into these data lakes to monitor the performance of the vehicle, the safety of the vehicle, all of these things to make sure that the vehicle experience is optimized for its users. And so we're seeing in the case where we have the more sophisticated capabilities and are able to do a stack, open roaming is actually a candidate for working in those spaces, and we're looking at that. As we go down the stack, it's going to take a longer amount of time, I think, because these little simple cheap Wi-Fi chips that are sub-dollar, that go into a smart bulb or something like that. I think they have to go a long ways, and I think it's going to take some iterations in the industry in order to solve that problem. But everything that we're doing when it comes to open roaming, whether it's using a certificate whether it's using a SIM, and in many cases for these types of IoT devices, it'll be an eSIM, whether it's using a token, which can be issued by the manufacturer in order to secure connectivity via the manufacturer themselves, and identifying that equipment, securing that equipment based on who bought it. All the things that we're doing in that arena around open roaming would also be applicable to this space. So I think we're learning a lot with these smartphones, tablets, PCs, and we'll be able to extend that into this next generation of IoT devices.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt, for sharing your thoughts. So let me propose that we move on the agenda. We are running slightly later on the agenda. So thank you, Matt. So let me introduce our last speaker for the webinar. So Eric McLaughlin from Intel is the Vice President of Client Computing Group and GM for the wireless solution. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. Good to be here. I would, like to join, others here in not just welcoming everybody here, but also, sharing that we hope everybody's safe, everybody's happy and healthy, and things that are going well despite the challenging times that we're experiencing today. Can't tell if my slides are showing yet.
Yeah, we can see it. Eric is all
Okay.
looking good.
Okay, great. All right. Well, the title of my presentation here is Wi-Fi 6 Revolution and the Road Ahead, but I wanted to spend a little time first. Sometimes before you go forward, you got to kind of think about where you've been. So I took some time this week as I was preparing this to think about my story, and I wanted to just share a little bit of that with you. So from 1990 to 1995, I was an IT manager for a civil engineering firm that had offices throughout the Pacific Northwest. And our first claim to fame, we actually got a PC Magazine story of us taking the first Intel 486 CPUs off the line and putting them into a CAD network and utilizing those capabilities, in a big way. And so my first charter in that IT role was to put a computer on every CAD person's desk, and then expanded that to every person's desk within the company. Then, of course, along came, some need to network, right? We started with the Novell network. We built that out. We layered it on with, an email application. I'm dating myself big time here, I know, but it was called Right Hand Man, and it looked like a DOS application that had gone wrong, but it worked. We got emails across the company, or at least in the offices. And then my next job was to connect all those offices together. So I jumped in on the T1 lines and got the offices connected, and that was great. It also had some problems. One of my I guess funny stories from that time was the time when one of our smallest offices mistakenly tried to back up every server in the network over the T1 and brought everybody in the company that was still working to their knees while they pulled all those megabytes of data. And it's funny to say that, but it was literally just megabytes of data that brought the entire network to its knees. But then, fast forward to the end of that time frame. And I was sitting at home, and I'd been working with an ISP, and I turned on my computer and I clicked the button, and I heard this sound, and I hope this comes through on the thing. Did that come through? Do you hear the modem?
No.
No.
Yes.
Okay. Some of you did. So that was what I was trying to play was the sound of a 14.4 baud modem connecting to the internet. That was my and I didn't experience that for the first time at work. I experienced that for the first time at home. And I connected and, you know, got onto this thing called Yahoo and, you know, started looking around and, you know, I didn't even know what to do or where to go or how it worked, but, you know, slowly figured out. But I can tell you one thing, I was hooked. You know, I was hooked on the need to have access to this capability and, you know, and expand it. So, oops. Fast forward to today, right? Who'd have thought, you know, I guess it's almost 25 years since that, you know, first time of clicking on that button and hearing that modem sound. We have 5.3 billion global users of the internet today, and over 300 million of those in the US alone. You know, certainly, you know, in that 25 years, a lot has happened. Some of this has been covered today, but just to reiterate some of the great things that are happening in Wi-Fi, right? That 50% of global IP traffic runs over Wi-Fi today. And over 60%, you know, some studies show it even much higher than that, of mobile traffic is offloaded to Wi-Fi today. The shipments of Wi-Fi devices are, you know, astounding, right? 4.6 billion by 2024, with a huge installed base of over 15 billion Wi-Fi capable products. I've mentioned this, you know, before in the WBA, but I think last time I presented, I had 15 Wi-Fi devices in the home. I have 21 now that are you know, active at any given time. That 15 billion is 2 per person, right, on the planet. So I'm an overachiever when it comes to Wi-Fi devices, you know, in my home. But some of you may have more. One guy on my team had 28, and I talked to a guy from HP the other day that had 41. So you know, lots of Wi-Fi in our homes. And then obviously one of the main things that's you know, been shared, you know, really well by Edgar and the WFA team is the economic contribution that Wi-Fi brings to all of us, right? The global of over 3.5 trillion, and in the US, $1 trillion of global economic benefit. You know, since Chairman Pai was here, I wanted to make sure and, you know, remind him of one of the great things that I think really shows the, you know, the benefits of Wi-Fi in the world is that Wi-Fi is the fabric that binds together all of our digital devices. That was from 2019. I think he'd probably amend his statement a little bit today and say that it not only binds together our digital devices, but just like we're doing here, it binds together people and data and friends and family and work associates and keeps us, you know, progressing. So speaking of today, right, you know, right now, as has been mentioned a couple times, there's been a dramatic increase in need of wireless and broadband connections over the past, you know, quarter or so. 38% increase in overall global internet traffic growth. You know, mostly YouTube and Netflix per the study that we're looking at, but also huge upswing in video conferencing growth. Our friends at Cisco are seeing a 2x increase, Zoom 20x, Teams 2x, Google Meet 25x. Just you know, huge you know, uptick of the need for those types of capabilities. And in the US, 33% internet traffic growth. Again, Netflix and YouTube lead the way. Comcast saw a 285% growth in video conferencing. There are 20,000 employees in Oregon at Intel, just a little over 20,000. I think we account for a big percentage of that 285% in the Oregon Portland area. Then another one, global Wi-Fi traffic growing 80% in March, and then US Wi-Fi traffic of weekday home users growing 75% here in May. You know, some cities called out: San Fran, Seattle, Philadelphia, and New York. You know, just huge growth and huge need. And you know, again, a great quote here by Carl from the Charter Communications: the internet is Wi-Fi. If it's not great, the internet will not be great for consumers. That's how they connect. I know it's how I connect. So our great strides, amazing things are happening. Our job's not done yet, right? In the US alone, and I'm focused on the US here, there are sustained connectivity needs. We're looking at, you know, 84% of businesses are going to increase their work from home capacity as we continue to move through this pandemic. I know, you know, Intel IT shifted almost all of its resources. You know, we have 100,000 people worldwide, over 100,000 that all needed to work from home over the last little bit, and they did a phenomenal job keeping us up and running. But there's a capacity increase need, and Matt and I were talking yesterday, and I talked to some folks from Dell, you know, earlier in the week, and what we're hearing from Intel, for example, is we don't think we're going to go fully back to work, you know, in some ways the rest of this year and maybe never, right? To get everybody back in the building may never happen again. So we need to increase, you know, for enterprises, that work from home capability. We need to increase, you know, the ability of people to stay connected. Online education systems are absolutely taxed. You know, there's a huge percentage of people who have unemployment today, and a large percentage of them don't have access to basic broadband. There's some great things happening in, you know, the FCC, some great things happening, you know, schools and libraries and retail. People are enabling free Wi-Fi access in parking lots. You know, building hotspots. The government and private sectors are coming together to try to figure out how to solve some of these gaps. And there's over 30 states advocating incremental funding for national broadband funding. And there's always opportunities for all of us. And I think this is one of the places where the WBA does a great job, is trying to figure out how together we can go solve some of these key problems. And I think, you know, it's you know, a great opportunity for us to band together and do that as we move forward. So the good news is, even though we have gaps, the future is bright, right? We've talked a lot today about Wi-Fi 6 and the benefits of Wi-Fi 6 in capacity, speed, and improved latency. You know, we've got a lot of work being done across, you know, Boingo and Cisco and AT&T, Intel, and others to try to figure out how to, you know, make all of these technologies, all of these radios work really well together, and having a more deterministic and robust experience when you're using your wireless devices and using them for, you know, high priority things like connecting to a webinar or connecting to your work or your family. So we see you know, a significant increase year over year in our Wi-Fi 6 shipments, and we're seeing that across the industry. Wi-Fi 6E, you know, has been stated several times. We couldn't be more thrilled and proud of you know, what the FCC and Chairman Pai and his team through their leadership have done to release the 1200 megahertz of spectrum for everybody to utilize. You know, it's going to be a catalyst for innovation. One of the things I talk about internally a lot is that this new bandwidth is going to make everyday Wi-Fi better, better than it's ever been before. When you you know, layer that on top of what 6 in and of itself provides, adding that will make just everyday tasks better. Adding that will also make what used to be difficult tasks more mainstream. And then last but not least, that we'll be able to do some amazing types of innovation. You know, when you talk about being able to utilize 3 separate pipes, you know, for different things, and that's just in the Wi-Fi spectrum. We've got your, you know, 2.45 and 6 gigahertz and 5.9 as well, all available that you can utilize. For a device provider like us, you know, a solution provider, it gives us the ability to hand capabilities to to manufacturers to utilize all of those pipes in different ways to do different things. Some of you may have seen that, Intel did a recent acquisition. We continue to invest in our connectivity portfolio. We purchased a small company that specializes in enhancing quality of service, AP selection methodologies, and making sure you're in the right AP at the right time. They've got some amazing telemetry capabilities, traffic shaping and prioritization to all enhance the capabilities of devices with those solutions enabled. And we're excited to bring some of those to market over the next little bit. And then finally, with 6E, we paved the path together as an industry towards Wi-Fi 7. To be able to deliver the even bigger channel bandwidth. So Matt, I hope 160 becomes the new 80 or the new 20, and 320 becomes the new 40 or something soon. But we have all of the great work that was talked about earlier on making sure we can manage all of the various radios coming into an enterprise. With or an industrial application, to have all of this channel bandwidth and being able to do multi-AP coordination, multi-link operation, and deterministic low latency capabilities will really enhance what we can deliver as an industry. So I want to finish with two things. One is, first, the future is indeed bright. We're really excited about what's happening here at Intel. We're excited about what all of you are doing in the WBA. We are very proud to be a part of all that and to be included as partners in so many different ways to try to enhance, the experience that we can all deliver to people around the world. Chairman Pai quote here: "A once-in-a-generation chance to meet this growing demand for Wi-Fi capacity and even push the boundaries of what consumers think is possible with applications and services." That's exactly what we believe that this 1200 megahertz of spectrum will do. And last but not least, Intel's purpose is to create world-changing technology that enriches the lives of every person on Earth. And I'm, on behalf of Intel, I'm really proud that one of those technologies is Wi-Fi. And, judging by, what we're doing as an industry and what we're doing together, I truly think, we have changed the lives of every person on Earth, and we have a chance to change them even more going forward. So with that, I'm done.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, for your inspirational presentation. One question very quickly that I wanted to ask you. So regarding Wi-Fi 6E, when should we expect devices using Intel chipsets that becomes available on the market for Wi-Fi 6E?
So we have devices coming out in hardware, software, etc., that will be ready at the end of this year, and will be participating in the certification, via the WFA. So there are some things happening in the Windows OS, changes that are occurring in Microsoft's delivery mechanisms, which may push some of the 6E capabilities to later, full availability. So we're still working through some things with Microsoft on those changes, and of course with Google at the OS level as well. But our devices and products with those devices will be ready to ship the end of this year, and as we finalize the OS implementations, they'll be able to be turned on in the field pretty easily.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Eric. And I will keep and finish with your sentence. I agree as well. The Wi-Fi future is bright. Thank you for sharing that insight. So we are coming to the end of this first webinar from the Wireless Global Congress. I just want to share that the slides and the recording of this webinar will be shared with all the attendants, all the attendees that register. So over the next days, you will receive all that information. I want to highlight as well, if you are interested on these topics, and as we could just saw, by the presentation from Eric. Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E have a lot more to be discussed. Don't miss tomorrow's webinar. We'll be doing a deep dive on the capabilities of Wi-Fi 6 and the opportunities that will come up for the industry. And I want to finish the webinar by thank you all for being part of this, to all the speakers of today's webinar, and as well to all